Okay. We are live with Alexander Mercouris in London and Mr. Gonzalo Lira in Kharkiv. How are you gentlemen doing this afternoon?
Well, I'm doing extremely well. I'm having a wonderful day. It's a beautiful hot day here in London. Very, very sunny, but of course delighted to be on the program. And with Gonzalo as well, always a pleasure to have Gonzalo on our programs. And obviously we got big news to discuss.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on, rather. And we do. I have very big news to discuss. My motorcycle battery is recharging, so I'm going to be motorcycling around here because we have also gorgeous weather out here in Ukraine, and just a little bit of a smoke from that battle going on off to the east. But other than that, it's great motorcycle weather, and I'm just so cheered up because it turned out that the battery that I thought was dead and with everything closed, I wasn't going to be able to replace it. Well, it has come back to life. I've nursed it to health, and so I am in an incredibly good mood. And so we can talk about the evacuation of Azovstal. Yes.
Yes. The evacuation. Yes.
The evacuation.
Let's see. Welcome to everybody who's watching us on Odyssey, on Rumble as well, on YouTube, of course, to our community on Telegram. We do have a very, very active community on Telegram, so look for us there as well. And to our fantastic community on Locals. And the chat on Locals is always an amazing chat, full of a lot of great information and comments. Thank you to our moderators who are helping us out with this live stream. And I don't see any moderators right now. I don't see any of the blue wrenches right now in the chat, but I'm sure we'll have some moderators jumping in real soon. So
Alex, you can make me a mod. Wrench me and I'll be happy to moderate.
I'll be helping out in the moderation as well as we go through the big news of the day. And gentlemen, we have to talk about Azovstal. I think that's the big news of the day. Real quick, we're going to try to answer as many questions as we can from the viewers. We'll go for about 2 hours. And real quick, actually, let me just answer the super chats that just came in right now, and then we'll get into Azovstal and the evacuation of Azovstal. The evacuation. New Guardian says, "Hi, Coach. Congratulations on never getting cancer. I hear the Americans want to send $40 billion worth of cancer your way." That is from New Guardian Gonzalo. From Alan Shepard, would appreciate if you guys have a map of Ukraine when talking about the military operation. We will do that, Alan, on the recorded shows that we do. We try to get that in there. On the live shows, it just needs a little more coordination, but I'll try. Yeah. I'll try to get that up there as well. Possum Power, thank you for that super chat. Lads, any update on Kaliningrad? Remember that, Alexander Gonzalo, Kaliningrad.
Yeah,
we could discuss that as well. And some final questions real quick, and we'll get started. I'll pass it off to you guys. From Commander Crossfire says, on the reports of average age of the UAF troops in Donbass being over 40, do you think this could be malicious intent, as that age group would have, and this is one of 6, would have on the reports, would have been born Russian and might have a predisposition to accept dictate from Moscow, as opposed to the younger generation that knows only Ukrainian and West fascist propaganda, a callous calculation, but a believable endeavor by the West. Just look at the biolabs. The thing to remember, the West sees Ukrainians as Russians because they are, irrespective of how some radical Ukrainians might view themselves. As exampled by rich Russians being sanctioned. They may have believed their wealth bought them into the Western club, but the West always viewed them as Russian. Explains why they are super willing and eager to fight the Russians to the last Ukrainian, because either way, it's a dead Russian. Sorry, it's a long one. Don't be sorry, Commander Crossfire. I think Alexander and Gonzalo got what you're talking about with that question, and they'll address it. And Talatin, thank you for that super chat. Balke says, surrender, not evacuation, please. Very well said. Balke, we'll get into that. John Hancock says, Coach, should we stay subscribed to your Patreon? Real quick, Coach.
Yes.
Mr. Gonzalo Lira, should they stay subscribed?
Yes, the thing that's happened is that because I lost my phone, I've lost access to email accounts that included that. But I'm working on a workaround, and so I'll be able to have access to that account once again, and I will be restarting the Patreon shortly. And I'm so sorry to my Patreon subscribers, but I'm literally locked out. It's like being locked out of your house. It's incredibly annoying. And you're trying to break in, and I'm in the process of convincing the cops that no, this really is my house. So once that's all finalized, I'll be back on Patreon and making up for the material that I haven't been posting there. Okay.
All right. Thank you very much, Zishan. Thank you for that super sticker. Joe Public says, "Where are the scribbles?" It's a very, very good super chat right there. Where are the scribbles? David S., thank you for your super sticker. And the final questions, and we'll get started, is from Novus Black. Says, "Bits for the Bit God" from Odyssey. Thank you very much, Novus Black. And Novus Black says, "Plant a garden, homeschool your kids, get an extra blanket, say hello to your neighbor, buy some extra long-lasting food. When there's a sale, learn the basics of carpentry, buy a book about the local flora and fauna, and buy a detailed map of your surroundings. Ungovernable through independence." Well said, Noah's Black. Gentlemen, Azovstal. Some people are calling it an evacuation. Some people are calling it a surrender. Let's also talk about a little bit about Commando Crossfire Super Chat and the age of the fighters. Let's talk about Kaliningrad. Let's talk about all the news. Sammy says, "Gonzalo, do you have a Telegram channel?" Gonzalo, you don't have an official Telegram channel, not yet. So I will answer that. Not yet. And Tyler Durden says, "Keep it up, gents. Great content." And Toilet Sauce says, "You have to love the spin of the MSN. No mention of surrender or POWs. No, comrade, they are being evacuated. Just don't say they're heading to Russian-controlled territory." Alexander Gonzalo, the floor is yours.
Well, can I just start with what the Russian Ministry of Defense is saying? And this is the briefing by the Russian Defense Ministry. They do usually 2, sometimes just 1 briefing every day. They begin with these words: "The surrender of fighters from the Azov Nationalist Unit and Ukrainian servicemen blocked at the Azovstal plant in Mariupol began yesterday." So they use the simple, straightforward word surrender. So that's the Russian take. Now, we've heard lots of stories, lots of accounts about how these people are going to be exchanged, how they were ordered to lay down their arms, and there's going to be an exchange eventually, and that negotiations are underway about that. I'm going to say straight away that the Russians have said nothing about any plans or any discussions to exchange these people. As far as the Russian officials' statements are concerned, this is a straightforward surrender, apparently made without conditions. So an unconditional surrender of the troops in the Azovstal factory. I think we ought to say that because, as various people have been commenting, it's been referred to across the Western media with other words as an evacuation. That's the favored word. That, of course, all originates from the Ukrainian authorities. And it's actually, I find it really rather shocking, actually, how we're simply using euphemisms that the Ukrainian authorities are engaging in to describe an event where the word surrender surely is the right one.
Yeah, I mean, like, if you look at the dictionary definition of surrender, surrender is when you give up your willingness to fight an enemy and give yourself over to the mercy of that enemy, which is what is happening in this situation. An evacuation is when people who are stranded are moved away from that stranded position by people on their side. I'm not giving the best Merriam-Webster definition, but that's roughly it. This is a surrender. And what I said yesterday when I heard that they were coming to some sort of agreement, I said, and you're going to have to forgive my vulgarity here, but I said, I wonder what kind of brazen bullshit the Zelensky regime will come up with. And here you go. They just redefined the language. I mean, this is very, Lewis Carroll through the looking glass, words mean whatever I want them to mean. This is absurd. Now, what's very interesting is that there are reports. Now, this is unconfirmed, but there are reports that the Russians who are taking custody of these individuals, that is, accepting their surrender, are screening them, filtering them very, very carefully. They are checking their real identity against their paper and against Russian databases that they have. They are strip searching them insofar as looking for any fascist tattoos. And they are strip searching both the men and women who are coming out. Because do keep in mind, a lot of these women, they are very beautiful. The one that was, the two women there that were, greeting the Pope in that famous photograph and looking so tearful, because their husbands are Azovstal. Yeah, well, both of those women are covered with swastika tattoos underneath their very prim and proper clothes, And so anyway, the Russians are doing that. They're fingerprinting and photographing these individuals. Of course, the ones that require medical attention are getting medical attention. But what's interesting is that they are being held under guard. And once they are recovered from their injuries, they're going to be transferred to the POWs. And here's the interesting thing. The ones who are considered harmless, that are just regular soldiers, they're going to be in regular Russian POW camps. The foreign low-level mercenaries are going to be criminally prosecuted. The high-level NATO staff are, in all likelihood, now this is all rumor at this point, but in all likelihood, they're going to be turned over to the FSB, which is the Russian version of the FBI/CIA. And they're going to be, in all likelihood, but this is rumor at this point. I mean, nobody's confirming this for obvious reasons. The word is that these people, the high-level foreigners, are going to be shipped to Moscow for future debriefing and, of course, for political purposes. Now, here comes the interesting part. The Azov fighters, those who are known to be of the Azov battalion, those who are known to be ideologically driven, they will not be exchanged in any POW swap. And this is very important because the Russians are very firm on the issue that they are going to prosecute every single individual who committed atrocities against the Donbass in the previous 8 years. I mean, they're extremely serious about this. The only POWs that they are going to swap are those that they know for a fact are innocent of any war crimes and who are just regular soldiers. Those are the only ones who are going to be swapped in any kind of POW swap that might arise in the future. Because at this time, there is no agreement between the Zelensky regime and Russia for a prisoner swap. Yeah, that's what I have to tell you.
Absolutely. Can I just say, if you drill through the Ukrainian comments, the official comments from the Ukrainians, even the Ukrainians do not say that there is any agreement for a prisoner swap. This is not what the Ukrainians are saying. What they're saying is that they are in discussion with the Russians about some kind of an agreement to set up a prisoner swap. So this is a hope, if you like, from the Ukrainians. It is not a done deal. And can I just say, Gonzalo, you're absolutely right. The FSB undoubtedly will have a role in looking and correlating these people. Bear in mind that Azov is a banned organization in Russia. It is there classified as, well, essentially a terrorist outfit. I mean, that's the Russian view of it. So, and the FSB has an anti-terrorist role. But there is another organization which is a straightforward law enforcement organization and which is perhaps closer in its functions to the FBI, which exists in Russia, which is the Investigative Commission. And its chief, who's a man called Bastrykin, has recently been in Donbass, and he's actually, it seems, working to set up, war crime trials, if that's what the Russians decide to do. But no, he is. He's actually there. He's been collating information. He's got a team of investigators, and I'm absolutely sure that he will be very interested in these people. So it's this talk about an exchange, this talk about an evacuation, the talk about mission accomplished is. I mean, it's just spin. I mean, it is a straightforward surrender of people who really, in truth, ought to have surrendered a while back. They were not achieving anything by holding out in the factory in the way that they were. They weren't pinning down contrary to what is claimed, large numbers of Russian soldiers or anything like that. I mean, they were a nuisance for the Russians, but they weren't anything more than this. And this surrender should have taken place a long time ago. And of course, one is rather interested, one is curious to find who exactly is going to turn up out of the factory. Now, I'm not going to make any speculations about this. There's all sorts of wild stories circulating. But what is incontrovertible is that the Ukrainians, before the siege really tightened, tried to evacuate at least some of these people from the factory. And it'd be interesting to find out who they are. My own guess, by the way, is that they're Ukrainians, and that the point about trying to evacuate them from the factory is that they were important in the Ukrainian power structures, and that was why the decision was taken to try to extract them from the factory at so much cost. I'm going to also, by the way, express a personal interest, which is that there's this Ukrainian commander, Sergey Velena, who has been giving lots of rather emotional videos. I'm very curious to find out what his exact role in both Azov and in the Marine unit actually is, because I understand that there's some suggestions that though he's claimed at various times to be the commander of the regular troops from the regular Ukrainian armed forces in the Azov plant, there's some denials that he actually is, and that he's in fact really an Azov person. Well, I'd be very interested to see. This is just my own personal curiosity. But anyway, this brings this episode to an end. And I just wanted to say one very last thing, which is I think that the Ukrainians built up this story. They made out these people to be heroic fighters, Spartans at Thermopylae, and all of this. It reminds me a little of what happened in 2015 when there were Ukrainian troops holed up in the airport at Donetsk, and they too were built up into sort of heroes. And of course, when the resistance collapsed in Donetsk airport, it had an effect on Ukrainian morale. And I suspect the same will happen with the surrender of these people at the Azovstal factory. Anyway, that's me. Over to you, Gonzalo. You were going to say something.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And I think, too, that that's why they are so furiously spinning this whole issue as, it's an evacuation, not a surrender. And the spin is monumental. I mean, the ability to fool yourself and for other people to allow themselves to be fooled, because, come on, we're all grown-ups. None of us is that stupid. And so the fact that everybody is marching along to this ridiculous notion that this is an evacuation, it's just ridiculous. And so it seems to me, and this is, you, Alexander, said that you're not going to speculate because you're not one to speculate irresponsibly, because of course you cannot, because that is my department to speculate irresponsibly. And so my irresponsible speculation is, I think that probably the situation in eastern Ukraine and Donbass is much, much worse than we realize. Not in terms of the actual map, but in terms of morale, in terms of the men just being at their wits' end. I also believe, too, that there must be an enormous amount of pressure coming from the family members of so many of the men fighting. Because, these babushkas, these wives, these children of all these fighters, the amount of social media pressure, it must be overwhelming for the Zelensky regime because, as they say, live by the sword, die by the sword. Fine. Live by the social media, die by the social media. And I think that they must be feeling the heat and, to the point that they're kind of like afraid to step outside insofar as social media is concerned for fear of getting attacked by mothers, wives, daughters, children of fighters, and saying, this is crazy. You have to end this. This is pointless. And so I think that a lot of that must be going on. I'm not giving a specific point to this, but I'm just saying that must be a very large factor. And that's why they're so furiously spinning this as an evacuation rather than what it is, a surrender. Because if it were to be played as a surrender, if it were to be played straight, or even if those men had been allowed to die, because that was Zelensky's original idea. The Zelensky regime wanted those men to die, potentially to have a bunch of martyrs. And I don't think that the men in the Azovstal were very keen on being martyrs. And so there you go. Here we are in this situation. I think that the Zelensky regime would have preferred martyrs, because that would have been like, fight on for the men of Azovstal kind of thing, and rally the troops and blah, blah. But, a destruction of those men or their surrender is a PR disaster, particularly the surrender, because it gives other soldiers the idea that maybe surrendering is the smart idea. And that's the issue. I think that they are desperate to avoid that, because armies, when they collapse because enough soldiers decide this is not worth fighting anymore, and they raise their hand. That's how an army collapses. And so that's why I think they're terrified of labeling this a surrender.
Absolutely. Can I just also quickly say that Mariupol, up to this point, has been the biggest battle in the war in Ukraine. I mean, we've been hearing lots of stories about battles. There's the battle for Kiev, which in my opinion was never a real battle. There were some skirmishes around Kiev, but there was never this kind of battle. This is a real big battle. I mean, thousands of troops, Ukraine especially, committed thousands of troops to defending Mariupol. Perhaps it was a mistake to do that, but they did. They made a big symbol out of Mariupol. The entire garrison of Mariupol has now been either killed or wounded or taken prisoner. So this has been an unequivocal, clear-cut defeat for Ukraine. Now, we don't hear about this. We don't hear the word defeat mentioned very much, but this is what this is. A clear-cut, conclusive defeat. The first, if you like, cauldron, encirclement to achieve its objective. The first battle, if you like, the first big battle, and it's the one that Ukraine has lost. There's more battles coming. Now, I wanted to just I'm going to touch on this question about the 40-year-old soldiers and whether this might be a deliberate demographic policy. I see the argument, but on balance, I don't think so. I think that throwing older men into the battle in that kind of a way, rather than your younger, perhaps more motivated men, isn't going to change the demographic balance in Ukraine in your favor. It is going to do what Gonzalo was saying. It is going to demoralize your army and your society and lead to people protesting in social media terms. It's not, to my mind, a sign of a policy. It's a sign of a government that is running out of manpower, running out of human resources to throw into the battle. So I don't think this. Also, it seems a lot of these 40-year-old men are coming from Western Ukraine, which is an area where, there are not, frankly, many pro-Russian people anyway. So I don't think that these people are the kind of people who, from Western Ukraine, who, even if they're in their 40s, would characterize themselves as Russians, even if the West likes to sometimes, think of them in these terms, or has thought of them in those terms. So I don't think this is correct. I think that this is not a strategy, a political or demographic strategy. It's rather a symptom of a military that is running out of resources, running out of fuel, running out of ammunition, running out of tanks, and running out of men, and whose morale is probably starting to slip, exactly as Gonzalo says. Now, on the other point, though, about, setting East Slavs, Russians, if you like, and Ukrainians against each other, I think there may be some truth to this. I mean, certainly you find a lot of Russians who talk in this way, that this is a terrible tragedy that these two fraternal nations have been turned against each other and are fighting this kind of war, and that the West benefits from it. I mean, that I accept, but I don't think that this is a deliberate policy to sacrifice an entire demographic in order to alter the political balance in Ukraine. So that's, I just wanted to address that particular point.
Yeah, and I also want to add to your point, there's something very important. See, the territorial defense forces that Ukraine has numbers something like 300,000 or 250,000 men, I forget, it doesn't really matter. The point is that, see, this territorial defense, excuse me, it's I have it right here in front of me. It's 130,000 volunteers. Here's a key issue: the territorial defense forces, which are being used in the east, well, they acquired their members. Their members joined with the understanding, if not the explicit commitment, that these territorial defense forces would be local. If you joined in, say, Lviv, you would be the territorial defense force of Lviv. If you joined in Kiev, you'd be in Kiev. You wouldn't be shipped to the Donbass. That was the agreement. And so I think that there's a lot of demoralization. I agree with you that the reason that these old men, and well, they're frankly younger than I am, but these old men are fighting here is that they've run out of the young men. The young men have either are under arms or they have fled. They are underground, either in the country or they've fled elsewhere, either to Russia or to the West. And do keep in mind, I suspect that a lot of young men, of fighting age men, slipped over to the Russian side. Not because they wanted to join the Russians, but because the border between Ukraine and Poland is a lot more policed than the border towards Russia. And the Russian border patrol, on seeing some Ukrainian young men, would understand, oh, these guys are fleeing the potential conscription, and they'd be a lot looser, whereas the Polish border guards would have the opposite approach.
Yeah. Can I just say on this, and I mean, just to also follow up on that point, I mean, there was a lot of commentary in the West and Britain about how Zelensky is now saying that, you know, Ukraine's going to call up 1 million men. Now, this is two things to say about this. First of all, I mean, this is all over the media here in Britain. The BBC was running it as its headline for a while. I mean,
really?
First of all, this. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, you know, the BBC was talking about an evacuation yesterday. It somewhat scaled that down, by the way, this morning. I think even they realized that they couldn't really sustain that claim that this is an evacuation. But of course, if you really do try to enlist 1 million men, you're going to do two things. Firstly, you're going to provoke an enormous amount of opposition in your own country. I mean, believe me, I mean, in this kind of situation, trying to bring together 1 million men into one particular force, I mean, the amount of people who will oppose this, who will, you know, resist it, who will come out and protest against it is going to be huge. And the second is that, of course, Zelensky doesn't mean it anyway. I mean, it's just a thing that he says. He says lots of things, and it's staggering to me that the BBC and these media organizations took that claim seriously. But anyway, as I said, I don't think...
Can I just... Yeah. Sorry, Alexander, can I just make one point on that? Doesn't it also, a question to you and to Gonzalo, doesn't it also give you a window into how Zelensky, I was going to say Zelensky, how Zelensky, how Zelensky and the mainstream media, the BBC, and even people like Lord Austin, doesn't it give you a window as to how they view the Ukrainian society and Ukrainian men when they just say, yeah, just throw 1 million of them there, because our strategy at the end of the day is to weaken Russia. We don't care who perishes. We don't care who suffers. We don't care if it's 1 million men, 2 million, 3 million. For them, these are just numbers. Yeah, 1 million. Throw 1 million. That's fine. Throw 2 million. As long as we get the destruction and the regime change in Russia that we want. This is a question to you, Alexander, and to you, Gonzalo. I mean, it does give you a window into how they think, because they don't see these as people. They don't see these people fighting as having families, as having loved ones, as wanting to go back to their wives or their girlfriends or just hanging out with their buddies. They don't see that. They just see numbers. Throw them there. Throw them there.
It's that they don't. Neither Zelensky nor Lloyd Austin view the Ukrainian people as their people, because they're not. And so because of it, because of ethno-religious differences on the one hand, and the other hand, racial and ethnic and national differences, of course, they don't see the Ukrainian people as their people, as their people that they have to look after. They don't see it that way at all. And so, you know, there's that disconnect. And you can go back to, say, for instance, the First World War, where the aristocratic class in Europe, especially, they felt themselves to be of a separate class, of a separate category than the common people in their own nations. And this was the case with the German, French, and British aristocracies that went ahead and threw away the lives of countless millions of their own people, because that is what has happened in our society. The on the one hand, the elites have become disconnected from the working classes, the lower classes, call them what you will. They become completely disconnected from them, and in point of fact, they sort of like look down on them and want nothing to do with them, on the one hand. And on the other hand, in this particular case that you're mentioning, Alex, well, the Zelensky and Lloyd Austin do not view the Ukrainian people as their people because they are not. And that's why they treat their lives so cheaply and in such a despicable manner. That's my thinking.
I entirely agree. Can I just say, and I think this is an important point to make, I think you will find much more empathy and concern for Ukraine and its people on a program like this from people like us. We really care about Ukraine. And I think this is a point to make. We really care about the people of Ukraine. We think this war is a catastrophe for Ukraine. I am personally revolted by this use of countries as, pawns in some elaborate geopolitical chess game. And then I go over to the BBC and I go over to other parts of the British media, and I read these, extraordinary triumphalist accounts of often fictitious battles, and some, I'm going to say, incredibly bloodthirsty commentaries that I sometimes read there. And it goes directly to the point that you made at the start of this discussion, Alex, that these people are not really interested in the lives of the people of Ukraine. They're not interested, obviously, in the lives of the people in Russia. They're not concerned about the fact that these people have families, that they have children and parents and brothers and sisters and wives, in the great majority of these soldiers who are fighting. As far as they're concerned, this is some sort of great geopolitical game, and these people are expendable. They don't even really exist in any true sense. And I find it deeply disturbing. And if the West really cared about Ukraine, they would be doing that which we have been urging right from the start, not just over, since the start of this war, but since, the Maidan crisis, even before. They would be advising Ukraine to negotiate peace. When there was that meeting in Istanbul back in March, it looked as if a negotiation might be about to get underway. And it was the British and Americans who blocked it. And that was utterly wrong and deeply shocking. And it has profoundly shocked me.
Yeah, I completely agree. And there's no way to go back on negotiations. Look, the thing is, before we started the show, chat, the three of us were talking, and we were basically a little nervous because we're thinking, this thing might end very quickly. And I think that to tell you the truth, it feels that we're getting there to that moment where the whole thing just collapses. And I just pray that it happens as quickly as possible, because every day that this is prolonged, it's more dead Ukrainian men who are irreplaceable, because the people who love them, all of them, there will be broken hearts everywhere, and it's for nothing. Do you know how many Ukrainian soldiers are being lost per day? Estimates are between 400 and 700 per day. That is an astronomical number. No country can long survive this way. And so I just pray that this war ends quickly, because every day is just more death for nothing.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I would also add, by the way, that a commander, which is who Zelensky is, should never have allowed his soldiers to fight on pointlessly in Azovstal in the way that he did. These people could have been instructed to lay down their arms weeks ago with no change, no difference to the overall state of the battle. And except, of course, in morale terms, if you like, this is always a PR thing at Azovstal. And I mean, it was incredibly cynical and actually deeply shocking. And by the way, just to also say that when the Azovstal, when Mariupol was first blocked, and it became clear back in March that it would certainly fall, I also remember that the Russians at that point offered the Ukrainians the option of evacuating all their troops from Mariupol, and the Ukrainians refused. And in fact, they refused repeated offers from the Russians to evacuate, to lay down their arms, to do these things. Now, if there is a point in fighting, if there is some achievable objective, then by all means, I can understand that from a logical military point of view. I'm not a military person, but I can just about understand that. There was no military logic in this. The Ukrainians are trying to spin this by claiming that the defense of this garrison in Mariupol somehow saved Zaporozhye. There's no evidence that the Russians had any plans at this stage of the war to attack Zaporozhye. This is pure inference, pure speculation. It's not even that, it's just spin, ultimately. And there are, in fact, very, very strong political reasons why the Russians would not want to attack Zaporozhye, which is that the most important factory there, the Motosich factory, is owned by the Chinese.
It's so much. It's so disconcerting that the Western analysts they keep on ascribing to Russia that Russia has certain objectives and motives and timetables, and they're just making it up out of whole cloth. And of course, they say, "Oh, Russia is going to do this by May 1st." And of course, Russia doesn't do that because they have a completely different objective. And so May 1st rolls around, and these commentators say, "Oh, the Russians are losing because they didn't do X by May 1st. Therefore, since the Russians are losing, that means that Ukraine is winning." Because for them, if one side is losing in their idiotic black-white mentality, the other side must be winning, of necessity. And that's the insanity that has gripped these people, these commentators, because they're fools. And the level of self-delusion. I want to pivot a little bit in our conversation to talk about this journalist from Al Jazeera, this very pleasant middle-aged lady whose name slips my mind, who was wearing a blue helmet and a blue vest that said press on it. And she's a very well-known press person for Al Jazeera. And she was shot in the head and died instantly. And Forbes, the Forbes.com, the news magazine, they actually put out, but then they retracted, a statement along the lines of a bullet impacted a journalist in the head, instead of saying the IDF shot this journalist, because that's what it was. It was a Israeli sniper who shot this poor woman. And of course, I'm sure you gentlemen saw the video of her funeral, which was a complete and utter disaster. And with the Israeli occupying forces bludgeoning people and hitting them, and the casket nearly falling as the pallbearers are carrying her to the church, because this woman was Christian. And they are carrying her casket to the church, holding her casket up, as these security forces, quote unquote, are bludgeoning them and beating them and kicking them. And of course, in the West, they're like, "Oh, nothing happened. It was just a stray bullet impacted her in the head." It's just absurd, the level of delusion, the level of deceit. I'm sick and tired of the deceit that the Western media pushes on every front. That's the thing that I think is driving me a little bit nuts. The level of deceit. Sorry for running, guys.
Well, can I also say, though, I mean, at least you have journalists who go to the front lines in that part of the world, in the Middle East. You notice the total absence of Western journalists to any extent in Donbass, where this titanic battle is taking place. Now, can I just say, I think that we are in an interesting moment. I don't know that it's a tipping point or an inflection point, but there's a number of things to say. Firstly, it seems to me that the sanctions program is now running into severe problems. I mean, gas for rubles has now essentially won. We discussed this I mean, they've all, the EU is, pulling up the white flag there. The oil sanctions are in a mess. They can't be agreed. They've accepted that the oil can be shipped around by EU tankers. That undermines the whole idea of an oil embargo anyway. So that doesn't look like it's going to work out as it should. So oil sanctions, energy sanctions are not working. The financial sanctions have been a complete failure. Last time I looked, which is just before we started this program, ruble is trading at $64.50 to $64.50 rubles to the dollar. So it's stable, and we now get this accumulation of news from the battlefields in Ukraine. Firstly, obviously, we've had Azovstal, the end of the battle in Mariupol, which is, as I said, so far the biggest single battle in this conflict. But we're also getting more and more information that in Donbass itself, in the northern Donbass region, around Severodonetsk and all of these places, the Ukrainian forces are now being isolated from each other, encircled, broken up into penny packets. The Ukrainian counteroffensives around Izium seem to be failing. And by the way, for what it's worth, the great Ukrainian counteroffensive north of Kharkiv seems to be going into some kind of reverse, at least in some places too. So we are looking at a situation where the sanctions war is sputtering and failing, and where the military situation is now taking a very, very difficult turn for Ukraine. Now, I tend to agree with you, Gonzalo, that I think that Ukraine is running out of resources. They're talking about, how this flood of Western weapons is going to change the battle. They're talking about launching their own counteroffensive in August. But these are the same people who can't talk straightforwardly about what's happened at Azovstal. Why should we believe them?
Well, look, first of all, this notion that in August there's going to be a counteroffensive, if this continues until August, I will assure you that it will mean that Russia is in complete control of the entirety of the country, because there is no way that this conflict lasts until August. There is no way that they can assemble the men and the material for any kind of counteroffensive by August or any other time. It's over. It's over. It has become a police action at this point. And so the issue, of course, is, when is the Ukraine army going to wake up to reality? That's the only question at this time. Now, insofar as to pivot to the European sanctions, look, there was a lot of talk. I love to speculate, but I'm not one for conspiracy theories. I do believe that Elvis is dead and Paul is alive and Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. Okay, and if anybody disagrees with that, be my guest, but I'm going to stick with it. I am not one for conspiracy theories at all. And so when I heard the notion that maybe part of getting the Europeans to go with sanctions was the Americans were deliberately trying to harm the European economy, I heard that and I thought, no, that's too 4D chess. That's too Machiavellian. And the people in Washington, the gang that can't shoot straight. But now I'm starting to wonder, because these Europeans, they seem so hell-bent on destroying their own economies. And the notion of the oil embargo, which, one country, Hungary, is the only one really sticking up and saying, no, this is a horrible idea and we're not going to accept it because it would kill our economy, so we're not going to allow it. And you guys need unanimity for a policy like this. The only one country out of however many there are that spoke a little bit of common sense here, this leads me to conclude that there's something either deeply wrong with the European leadership. I mean, wrong like psychiatric wrong, because nobody can be insane, or that there really is some sort of weird conspiracy and that this is a deliberate drive to destroy the European economy. Because, Germany is being deindustrialized, forcibly deindustrialized, in a way that hasn't happened since the Second World War. And all the work of the last 70, 80 years that has gone into the German economy to make it, what it is today, it's being just thrown out the window. I don't understand what's going on. And the only winner here, clearly, are the Russians. The Russians are disputably winning this economic war of attrition, as you correctly call it. And the Americans are not winning, but they're losing less than the Europeans. The Europeans are the... And I certainly do not think that in 5 years we're going to have a European Union. I think that the whole thing is going to collapse. The euro is slowly sinking. Well, actually not so slowly, quickly sinking. It will soon reach parity with the dollar, which we have not seen since, I do believe, 2003 or 2004. This is a disaster. I'm sorry for sort of like ranting all over the place, but I can't get over the horror that we are witnessing.
Well, can I just say, I think there's a lot of different things all happening at the same time, and don't underestimate the way in which the European political class itself has authored its own destruction and that of the European economy. Can I just say, I mean, Janet Yellen, who's the US Treasury Secretary, tried to warn the Europeans off against oil sanctions.
Yeah.
But Ursula von der Leyen and Charles Michel and all of these people, they wanted to go ahead anyway. And they had the support of the Green Party in Germany. So, I accept there are probably some people in the US who would want that. But there are others, Janet Yellen, for example, who presumably don't. I mean, so she warned them publicly. She said, don't do it. But they wanted to go ahead and do it. And you're quite right that Hungary, Orban, talked sense, and nobody else had the courage to come out openly and do so, which is really damning about the state of the European political class, but about the risk of deindustrialization, the risk of destruction of the European economy. Well, we've now had the president of the BDI, which is the biggest German industrial union. He's come out today, or I think it was yesterday actually, and he's actually said cutting ourselves from gas would be a catastrophe. Now, how they have ever got themselves into these situations is beyond comprehension, but they did. But remember, they also took that disastrous decision to de-SWIFT the Russian banks, to sanction the Russian central bank, to do all of these things. And of course, it's not just the Europeans who are paying the price of that. The US is paying the price of that too, because it is accelerating the development of alternative payment systems. But anyway, that's a big topic. We'll discuss it, I think, in more detail eventually in maybe a separate program. But anyway, that's what I want to say about all,
what do you think of all
of these. Well, I mean, again, Finland joining NATO. By the way, I'd like to say Putin's words on this have been completely misrepresented. It's been suggested that he's, says, Finland joins NATO. It's not something we particularly oppose because we don't have issues with Finland. What Putin actually said was there is no logic in Finland joining NATO because we have no quarrel with that country. And up to now, they have had no quarrel with us. So why are they being dragooned into NATO? It is because one country, namely the United States, wants them to join. That's what Putin actually said. His words were, again, twisted and taken out of context. He wasn't softening Russian opposition to Finland joining NATO. Now, Finland joining NATO, Sweden joining NATO is a huge mistake by these two countries. They are throwing away the protection that neutrality gave them. In the case of Finland, it actually gained hugely from the fact that it was neutral. It had an excellent relationship, firstly with the Soviet Union and then with Russia, which has been completely jeopardized and put at enormous risk. And of course, it's now going to be part of a battle line. And again, it's impossible to see, as Putin said, how that actually helps Finland. And I would add the other thing it's done, though I don't know how seriously to take this, though his latest comments on the topic are, extraordinarily strong. But I mean, it's also given Erdogan another nice new tool to bargain with and to extract a very, very heavy price from the West. I mean, his latest comments on Finland and Sweden, which appeared over the last couple of hours, are extraordinarily strong. And if you take them seriously, if you take them as read, which I don't, by the way, but if you do, then I mean, what they would imply, I mean, it's difficult to see how he can do anything other than veto their accession. Of course, if that does happen, then the Finns and the Swedes will have still given away their neutrality, because, to be very clear, an application to join NATO is a repudiation of neutrality. They will have thrown away their neutrality without getting the alleged benefits of the NATO protection that comes with Article 5. So it will be a disaster, a catastrophe for those countries.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, it's something that people don't seem to realize. They look at Sweden, they look at Finland, and they're these socialist, postmodern socialist utopias. Everything is so wonderful and beautiful and pretty and clean, and healthcare and retirement and all that. Well, how do you think that they paid for that? They paid for that because they didn't need to have a huge army or a large defense expenditures. They could divert what would have been their defense expenditures into the public sector, into social programs, because their neutrality allowed them to. From the point of view of the Soviet Union and Russia, having neutral Finland and neutral Sweden, neither country is of any interest historically to the Soviet Union and now Russia. And so they would never really going to bother with either country. And that's why those two countries could afford to have the wonderful social systems that they had. Now they're not going to be able to afford them, because by merely applying to NATO, as you very well put it, they're foregoing their neutrality. Ergo, they're going to have to spend a lot of money on defense, because all of a sudden it's an issue. For the Russians, paradoxically, having Finland and Sweden become a part of NATO simplifies the situation militarily for them.
Yeah.
Because now they're going to have, do keep in mind, the Russians do have a border with NATO countries, so the Baltic republics. But you see, the Baltic republics are geographically isolated. And so in many ways, they are a pushover. The same with Finland, the same with Sweden to a lesser extent. That militarily they're a pushover. Having them neutral created problems for them. But the end of that neutrality makes it simpler for the Russians. They can easily sweep into the Baltic republics, militarily sweep into the Baltic republics and Finland, and have control of that. And all of a sudden, it's a totally different Baltic Sea. And people don't seem to realize this. Of course, the military planners, I mean, quite apart from the political planners, I mean, Jens Stoltenberg. I'm sorry, but I have to say this. Jens Stoltenberg is the dumbest white man to ever walk the earth, because he is so stupid. He is on the level of Kamala Harris. That's how stupid. Those two together should be together, because together they're stronger, aren't they? But anyway, I'm referencing the idiotic speech that Kamala Harris gave. But just to finish this point about Finland and Sweden, they are destroying themselves. They are a part of this insane cabal. And the worst part is that it's ideological and moral virtue signaling. And the final point, the Europeans are committing financial suicide in a way that is very, very reminiscent of 1914, where the Europeans committed demographic suicide by throwing their troops into a war that was pointless and needless. They are throwing their economies into a pointless and needless war that they cannot win. And that's tragedy. If you think of what they are doing now as analogous to 1914, only instead of people, it's economies, they are acting exactly the same way.
Yeah, a number of points here, Gonzalo, which is basically taking it further from where you are, because I know these countries. I never been to Sweden, but I've been to Finland. I know Finland reasonably well. I've been to Helsinki, marvelous city, by the way, very, very like St. Petersburg in places, because it was built by the Russians at the time when Finland was part of the Russian Empire. And I also know Germany. The whole point about the German Scandinavian, North European social democracies, and of course the Scandinavians, including the Finns, took that incredibly well, is of course they were underpinned by very, very productive, highly productive industries, which, by the way, were heavily protected industries, which provided the tax revenues upon which you could build up the welfare models. Now, those industries, in terms of Germany, and to some extent Scandinavia, depended, as you correctly said, on relatively low defense spending, but also, of course, on cheap, reliable, steady energy.
Yeah.
Increasingly coming from Russia. Take that all away, you can't maintain those industries.
No.
You don't have the tax revenue to sustain your welfare systems. Those welfare systems are, of course, already buckling because of immigration pressures, which they were not designed to cope with. And it's very, very difficult to see what's left of German and Scandinavian social democracy surviving. Now, earlier generations of social democrats in Scandinavia knew this very well. So if you're talking about Swedish leaders like Tage Erlander, who was the Swedish prime minister, social democratic prime minister in the 1960s, or Urho Kekkonen, who was the president of Finland. He wasn't a social democrat. He was from the agrarian party, but he pursued social democrat policies, and he was allied much of the time with the social democrats. They understood that very well. Now, that earlier tradition of social democrats, which is the political tradition I used to identify with, I go back far. I first became involved in politics in the late 1970s. It seems an incredibly long time ago now. But that earlier generation of social democrat leaders would never have allowed their countries, Finland and Sweden, to make this utterly disastrous decision that we now see. Kekkonen and Erlander must be spinning in their graves with anger, because everything that they believed in and had built up has been destroyed by parties that they used to be allied with, or in the case of Erlander, they used to lead. So that's what's happening to North European social democracy. It is being destroyed. And of course, notice that the people who are destroying it are all of them utterly committed supporters of the EU, which is now essentially the litmus test in much of this part of Europe as to whether you're left or right. Now, the other thing I wanted to say is about the euro. Consider the paradox. The sanctions on the Russian central bank were intended to cause the ruble to crash. What is actually done is it's because it's forced the Russians, well, not forced the Russians, because it's caused the Russians to insist on gas for rubles, it's causing the euro to depreciate. It's strengthened the ruble and it's weakened the euro. Now, for the Europeans, this is a serious problem, because though we trade with each other in Europe in euros, we import much of our energy and much of our food from abroad. And we pay for those things principally in dollars, or in terms of our gas, now in rubles. So we're just stoking up inflation within the Eurozone economies.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is that, see, what the sanctions did essentially was that it eliminated Russian demand for European goods and services.
Yeah.
Now, you have to remember, you both, Alex and Alexander, will know this, but this is for the chat for those people who might not understand how it works. But you see, when people in Russia say they want to buy a BMW car, they need to pay for that car in euros. And so they have to go out into the open market with their rubles, because that's what the people in Russia earn. They earn rubles. And they take those rubles and they go typically to their central bank by way of their commercial bank. And they will buy euros from the central bank. The central bank will give them the euros. That person takes those euros and goes to the BMW in Germany and plops down those euros and says, give me a car. Right? I'm, of course, simplifying just for the sake of understanding the situation. Now, when you eliminate Russian demand for European goods and services, what happens is that there is not only less demand for the goods and services of Europe, there is less demand for the currency of Europe. And you'd think, well, it's not that big of a deal. Yeah, but the thing is, all of economy is just marginal. It's just a little bit. A couple of percentage points here and a couple of percentage points there is the difference between an economy that's growing and an economy that's depressed and going down the tubes. An economy is surprisingly delicate when it is going at high revs, as the global economy has been going over the last 40, 50 years. 40 years after the end of the oil shock of 79, when the economies came out of the 82 recession. It's been basically 40 years. And the economies of the West, including Russia, have been revving up. And this whole contraction of the economy, German industry is selling less, and at the same time, there is less demand for euros. And so what's going to happen in Europe is that we're not going to have a recession. We are going to have an open depression, because there isn't going to be the demand for European goods, and the currency is collapsing. We're seeing it. I'm watching it every day. I actually have positions in euro that I'm trying to get out of desperately because of this goddamn situation. Okay, it is collapsing. The eurozone is going down the tubes, and what is going to happen, of course, is that the various economies within Europe are going to start to say, I don't want to drown with these other people, because some of those economies would actually be better off without the euro. Some of these economies would be better off if they had their own local currency that they could devalue and have some competitiveness in this new economy. A lot of them are probably looking at Hungary. That Hungary is part of the part of the European Union, but has its own currency. And its independent currency allows it to be a lot more flexible in these changing situations, this changing environment. And so you see the problem that's going on in Europe. You're having a fall in demand, and also a fall in demand for the currency, i.e. inflation. And so it's going to be beyond stagflation. Everybody's saying, oh, it's going to be like the doldrums of the 70s. No, it's going to be like not even the 1930s depression. I would argue that it's going to be much more like the global depression of the 1890s, where the currency was losing value drastically, even as the economy was collapsing and contracting. So I think that that's what we should be looking at, something closer to the 1890s.
Yeah, which is a recession, a depression, of course, that isn't much discussed, because for some reason it's never registered that it was actually a gruelingly tough recession. It lasted for about a decade, and it was actually very, very debilitating in European society. I was going to make a suggestion. We've been talking for about an hour. We suggested that we would do 2 hours. Shall we start addressing some questions? What do you guys think?
Absolutely.
What do you think, Alex?
Yeah,
we do an hour of questions.
Got a few questions. Yeah, let's answer some questions. Yeah,
yes,
absolutely. Let's start with Life of Brian, who says, "What the world needs now is Clown World intro theme music." Agree with you, Life of Brian.
Agree.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Let's see here.
I would suggest it be the Benny Hill music. Remember the Benny Hill music?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I used to love Benny Hill.
Yeah, that's the song for these times, I think.
Yeah. Let's see. Novus Black says, "Is the ruble going stronger, or is the dollar losing value, and is the ruble just staying the same?"
Both.
Both. Well, first of all, the dollar is increasing. It's strengthening against most currencies, except against the ruble, against which it is depreciating. But of course, the dollar remains strong in other respects. It is the euro that is under the real pressure at the moment.
Yeah, the dollar is strengthening because people are exiting euro positions.
Exactly.
Because the euro has always been considered, to a great extent, essentially pegged to the dollar.
Exactly.
But since the European economy is going down the tubes, then everybody's saying, better to exit our euro positions. And that's why you're having sell-offs in euro bonds and euro-denominated assets. Yeah. And that's why you're seeing the daily loss of value of the euro vis-a-vis the dollar, and the dollar strengthening. But one has to emphasize that the dollar strength is not organic. It's people fleeing to safety, to relative safety in these times. If people could, they would all pile into the ruble. I can tell you right now, half a dozen people that I'm in contact with wish that there was an easy way to get into the ruble, because everybody's realizing what's going on and how the ruble is essentially backed by $75 trillion worth of commodities that are buried in the ground in Russia. And so everybody's realizing that's the currency I want to get into.
Kaliningrad. We had the question about Kaliningrad.
Kaliningrad.
Any update there about Kaliningrad? There was some talk between the Polish, I think the Polish foreign minister and the mayor of Kaliningrad, where they talked about changing Kaliningrad's name or something like that.
Yes, I know there was some talk about this, but the main thing is that Poland and the Baltic states are trying to cut off Kaliningrad from its road and rail links with Russia. So essentially, it has to be resupplied and connected by sea through the Baltic Sea. So there's pressure on Kaliningrad. I don't personally think this is dramatically dangerous, and I still think that any Western attempt to attack Kaliningrad would be utter folly. It is very, very heavily defended. There's lots of Russian troops there, and though officially there's no nuclear weapons there, I'm pretty sure that the Russians would see it as an attack on their national territory, and if it was done by NATO, it would very quickly escalate into some sort of war-type scenario. And the other thing I would say is that I understand that, as is always the case, the people in these places, feeling themselves under pressure, are particularly patriotic and, loyal to Russia.
Yeah. Sparky says yakety sax is the Benny Hill music. Yakety sax. I did not know that. Thank you, Sparky, for that.
An unperson here in Britain, by the way. I haven't heard anybody mention him. I mean, he used to be a person who with enormous influence in Britain. Everybody knew who he was, 30 years ago, 20 years ago. But it's a long, long time since I've heard his name.
Benny Hills?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
He's been cancelled, is what you're saying, Alexander?
Pretty much. Does it surprise
harmless man.
Does it surprise you? At least that's my own view. Anyway, shall we move on?
Red
white and too sexist. Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
Red Viking says, what kind of plastic NAZIs surrender? Well said, Red Viking. Possum Power says, the one condition was no filming, just saying. With the evacuation, there was no filming allowed.
That is difficult to accept because I'm actually seeing films and I'm seeing lots of photographs now appearing. In fact, there's one film I've seen in which there's this whole line. You can see it's an aerial shot, obviously taken by a drone. A whole line of Ukrainians moving across the Azovstal place, often carrying stretchers. So there is film, and of course photographs. I've seen some pretty vivid photographs in which people are being you see the Russians carrying out the usual searches and things of that kind. So I'm not convinced that even that restriction, that those terms have really existed to any great extent.
All right. Balki says, absolutely, they will be photographed, shaven and photographed again, databased and correlated to each and every war crime that is registered.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The Russians are very serious about doing a full-on Nuremberg type trial. And I think that it is, they don't want it to be perceived by anybody as a show trial. They want to make it as clear and above board and squeaky clean and formally proper as possible. And I don't blame them, quite frankly, because these guys are pigs as far as I'm concerned.
No.
Sparky
By
said-
the way, can I just quickly say, I mean, we haven't yet heard that all of the people in Azovstal have given up. I wonder whether there'll be some holdouts. If there's people who are afraid of those kind of things, trials and all the rest, it's not impossible that some of them might just try to cling on. Just saying, we'll see.
Oh yeah, I agree. Also, I think that some of the foreigners, whomsoever they may be, I think that they also are going to try to cling on or something. There's been talk about some American general that was fished out, but I have not heard confirmation.
No, so, I don't believe that story. I mean, and in fact, in terms of that particular American general, the photograph that was circulating was actually that of a well-known Ukrainian Azov person. So there was some muddle. So I'm not going to fall. I'm not going to start talking about that until I actually see some proof. There's lots of wild rumors, and at the moment, as far as I'm concerned, there are only rumors.
Yeah.
Sparky says, good work, fellas. John says, yes, good day, John. Zach Boyle says, it's a pattern of ex-pandemic vaccine, now evacuation. That's it, Zach. Andy Warhawk says, if NATO were to attack Russia directly, which border would this attack take place from?
That's a very good question. So, I mean, I'm not a military person. I'm not going to even try and guess. What I will say is this. Both the Russian and American militaries seem increasingly to be thinking that the Arctic is going to be the real point of battle. I mean, the Russians have been engaging in a massive reorganization of their forces in the Arctic, building bases, developing air defense systems, those sort of things. And if you look at the way in which their fleet is increasingly configured, it's basically increasingly becoming a fleet to wage war in the Arctic. And I suspect the US will probably want to do the same. And coming back to what Gonzalo was saying about Finland and Sweden joining NATO, simplifying Russian defense planning. If you think of the Arctic as the point of conflict, that makes complete sense, that it would be much easier to gain control of Scandinavia quickly as part of this, huge war that, might happen in the Arctic. But, all of this, I stress again, I'm not a military person. So, it's just, what I've heard people say.
I have to say about what would be the weakest point for NATO to attack? That's a very good question, but I have come to the conclusion, and I mentioned this I said this in a video that I did yesterday. I think that in a very real sense, I cannot point to anything specific. This is just an abductive inference based from a lot of different little data points. But it seems to me that the NATO commanders have realized that they can't really win with Russia, because ultimately Russia is a land power. And the United States, which is the real NATO, if we're talking about it, the United States is a naval power. It has 11 carrier battle groups. The Russians have one carrier, and certainly not the kind of battle group that the United States has. The United States is a naval power. That's how it wins wars. And I think that because of this, there is the realization that, no, we could really handle China, because China seems to be the coming thing. With these confrontations over the Solomon Islands, which is just ridiculous, because on its face, the agreement between China and the Solomon Islands is trivial. It's certainly not a military base or anything like that, but it's being blown out of proportion to create the excuse for the Americans to get into a war. And I personally think that NATO, at some point in the last three to 5 weeks, collectively made the decision, the United States, the military establishment collectively made the decision that war with Russia is a mistake, but war with China is winnable. And that's the feeling I get. I stress this is not something I can point to specifically, but there's that vibe. And also the obvious fact, we are now 10 weeks more? We're 12 weeks into this war. And not one NATO boot has been on the ground, at least not officially. And so I don't think it's going to happen. The entirety of the Western Ukraine has been wide open, really. But NATO has not come in. Poland, for all of its posturing, is not coming in. So this of course could change. There are rumors, of course, that come the 22nd or the 22nd or the 24th of May, there's going to be some movement. Well, we'll see if that happens. But those wild predictions sometimes are just wild predictions. But China is the real thing, because ultimately, even the neocons acknowledge that Russia is just to weaken China. Russia, in and of itself, is not important to them. They want to weaken and do a regime change in China, of all things. So, that's the thing. That's what I'm thinking.
Just to say, Gonzalo, I remember this was during the Cold War. I remember somebody once telling me, a military person, British military person, that a conflict between the US and Russia would be a battle between the elephant and the whale. They don't really have many points of overlap.
All right, Tina, thank you for that super sticker. Anoop, thank you for that super sticker. Leon says, will we see an evacuation from the Battle of the Donbass soon? Evacuation, in quotes.
One would like to think so in some ways. I mean, in the sense that what's happening in Donbass is utterly grim. I mean, Alex, Gonzalo, and I, we go through all sorts of places. We see pictures and films of what's going on there, and it is beyond harrowing. And it is overwhelmingly Ukrainians that we see. I look for pictures of Russians, but I don't find them, and that's, I think, an important point to make. And I look for pictures of Russian prisoners, and I don't find them either. But which is not to say that the Russians don't experience defeats from time to time. They did when they tried to cross that river, and we saw the pictures of the pontoon bridge, which was destroyed, and the Russian vehicles all around, not all of which were destroyed, though, by the way. But overall, it is exactly what Gonzalo was saying. It is awful, and 400 to 700 Ukrainian soldiers are dying there every day. So to hold on to territory which doesn't want to be part of Ukraine, so logically pull them back. People talking about bleeding Russia white. The country that's been bled white is Ukraine, not Russia. And as I want to just repeat again, long wars, if they end in victory, strengthen countries, they don't weaken them. And if you want the classic example of this, look to the United States, which fought that terrible war in the 1860s, the war, the war between the states, the Civil War, whatever you want to call it. The US eventually, the North won, and despite of all that expenditure of men and lives and weapons and all the rest, it came out of it much more powerful. So this idea that you can weaken Russia by prolonging this war, the country you're weakening and destroying is Ukraine.
I completely agree.
WOTB, thank you for that super chat. Command unit says more Ukrainian soldiers need to evacuate to Russia.
Yeah.
Jeffrey Rock says, I've heard it said that the U.S. can't handle a two-front war. If they can't get rid of Putin, perhaps the backup is to bleed Russia dry so Europe won't feel threatened while Uncle Sam looks east over Taiwan.
Well, I think I've just answered that question. I think on the contrary, and I want to just say this, if you start a war in the Pacific at the same time as you've got an ongoing conflict in Europe, you're not making Europe safer. You're making it more vulnerable, because then you are getting yourself into a two-front war.
Yeah, and look, again, the Americans, they realize that their economic might is coming to an end. They fundamentally realize this. And so the idea of overstretching themselves on a two-front war, even they are not that crazy. And so I think that if push comes to shove, or when push comes to shove, they'll focus on China, because they view China as more of a threat. Because even though Russia is showing itself to be awesome, militarily speaking, because this really is awe-inspiring, the way that they have handled this conflict, and the way that they really have dominance over it. Whatever happens on a tactical level, on a day-to-day level, little counter-offensives going one way or the other, and the battle lines moving here and there. At the end of the day, we are 3 months into this conflict, and they are taking a huge bite out of Ukraine, and they are completely, quote unquote, demilitarizing Ukraine in 90 days. This is incredible. I mean, you have to stand back and say, my God, yeah. And so the Americans fundamentally recognize this, but at the same time, they have this bizarre notion that Russia is just a gas station with nukes. And so they don't take it quite seriously and as such an existential threat as they do China. And so that's why I think that when push comes to shove, and it will, that day will come, they'll put all of their attention on China and defeating China in the Pacific. In a weird way, the people who are in leadership positions today will want to repeat the great Pacific victory of World War II. And that arrogance, that hubris will be their downfall. That's my thinking.
Well, can I also say, I'm afraid you may be right. And what a tragedy, because I don't think the United States has anything to fear from peaceful competition with China. I mean, I really don't. I mean, I've been to China. Very impressive in many ways. Huge manufacturing economy. But anybody who has been there would also have noticed, that there's lots of things that are not working perfectly well, and that the United States retains enormous strengths. So making this into a geopolitical struggle for mastery is stupid. It's not playing to America's strengths. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, and because look, the whole thing of maintaining unipolarity, of maintaining overwhelming dominance, it's a recipe for world war. And most important of all, this is basically the Wolfowitz doctrine. And the worst part of it all is that, see, you can't maintain that. And it's pointless to try to do that. And it is to your benefit to allow multipolarity and not try to fight the tide of history. I think that's the thing. See, the Americans twice in the last century were sort of like the great power alone among nations. Right after World War II and right after the collapse of the Soviet Union, they crested twice, and it was just a momentary accident of history. And instead of saying, "Oh, we're the sole superpower right now, but this is just luck and it'll change because." History reverts to the mean, like everything. Instead, they decided, no, we are going to maintain this superior status to everyone. And we are going to dominate everyone and potentially invade everywhere or anywhere in order to maintain this dominant position. This is hubris, insanity, and this is where it's led us to.
From Bauke, can we synchronize our information? How many are still left in the plant, do we think?
There's been some interest. Yeah, there's been some interesting things. Now, this is from a pro-Russian website. And I really want to make this clear. This is a pro-Russian website. But it says, in total, there were over 2,500 people were there at the time the commissioning began. I'm not quite sure what the commissioning means.
I think it means decommissioning.
Sorry?
I think they meant decommissioning. Decommissioning as a euphemism for total annihilation.
Yes. Oh, these Azov are 804. 404 wounded, of which 55 are severe, 200 dead. And there was also 3 Russian prisoners held in the factory. 1 officer and 2 soldiers. So 2,500 men. We don't yet know how many of them have come out and surrendered. But I want to stress, that's a Russian website. It's a pretty accurate one, mainly run by a man called Boris Rozhin, whom I'm sure both Gonzalo Alex have come across. But I can't vouch for the accuracy of those figures, but that gives us an overall sense of what was the numbers apparently in the factory. And I would also say that so far it's about 300 people that we know have come out and handed themselves in. We don't know whether there've been more over the course of the day, though I suspect there have.
From Steve-O, I heard a rumor that Russia warned Erdogan about the coup against him a few years ago. Can Turkey's no to Sweden and Finland be a repayment to Russia?
Yeah, I know
I doubt
that
it.
well.
Yeah, I know that story well. I think there's some credibility to it, by the way. I think that there are reasons to think it may be true. But I don't think Erdogan thinks that, because the Russians helped me in 2016, I get to help them now. I don't think that's how Erdogan behaves, actually. This is my own view. I'm aware of what Gonzalo says. But I think this is just Erdogan starting, a haggle, and at the same time, setting himself up to the Turkish people at a time of deep economic crisis in Turkey as the man who defends Turkey and its interests.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Erdogan views this completely opportunistically. Yeah. I don't think he really cares about Finland and Sweden, like generally. If the two countries sort of like vanished, I don't think Erdogan would miss a wink. Yeah. I think that he's just looking at like, ooh, I can get something out of NATO, by throwing up a roadblock, and they'll have to pay me off somehow.
Yeah.
He's a shrewd man. I mean, there's a reason that he is where he is and has lasted as long as he has. So it's a shrewd bet, completely opportunistic, means nothing. And in the end, he will agree to Sweden and Finland joining. He'll just, get his pound of flesh in order to give his approval.
I agree.
Peter says, always great to hear Gonzalo. Keep up the great shows, the best media today. Thank you, Peter. Commando Crossfire says, congrats on the 100K subscribers, Alex. Silence becomes cowardice when occasion demands speaking out the whole truth and acting accordingly.
Oh, sorry to interrupt. Yes, Alex, chat, please give a plus 11111 to Alex C for hitting the 100,000 mark. Yeah, we forgot to celebrate. I sent him a congratulatory email when it happened, but that was a private thing, and everybody in chat, yes, Alex C is part of the six-figure club. Yeah, he's a big boy now.
The six-figure club.
Yeah, exactly. And now, just remember us, when you're rich and famous and powerful on YouTube, Congratulations, Alex.
Absolutely. And of course, I add mine, and Alex and I have been exchanging words about this. Can I just quickly say, against massive obstacles, which we're not going to discuss because, well, there's reasons why we can't, but it's a huge achievement. I know how hard.
My channel has gotten a lot of dings from YouTube, that's for sure.
Yeah, the more truth you say, the more dings you get. And that's how it works.
We'll keep on going on, though. We'll keep on going forward. Michael says, hello, Galimera. Galimera, Michael. Thank you for that super chat. Jam says, how will this war be seen and studied in the future?
That's a huge question, actually. I think the military people.
I think Gonzalo kind of answered.
Absolutely. I think the military people. Exactly. I think the military people will be fascinated by it, and I think lots of important military lessons have been learned. I mean, to give one example, a few months ago, it's only a few months ago, we were hearing about the all-invincible, all-conquering drone. Well, clearly that's not that important. So as I say, people will look at that. They'll look at the strategies, they'll look at the tactics, but of course it's a massively important geopolitical event, and the historians will be writing about it lots. Gonzalo?
Yeah, from my perspective, the things that are shocking is how fast it's happened. And that's something that I anticipated before this war, when I had been in other discussions about potential wars in the future with China and that sort of thing. And it was more really broad strokes and theoretically thinking, with the satellite and communications technology and all the rest of it, I was thinking that the tempo of operations would be incredible. It would be relentless. And that the future war would be probably relatively short because they just chew through equipment. And that's what we're seeing. The Russians are sending over between 400,000 and 600,000 individual pieces of artillery per day. I mean, that's an incredible number of pieces of artillery. And that's per day. And so,
per day,
the modern this in particular, this war in particular, it's clear that the initial phase was trying to keep open options in several different options, trying to have a foot in militarily in Ukraine, trying to put political pressure for negotiations, trying to potentially conquer territory. Well, in the second phase, it's clear that they pivoted to the direction of conquering territory. And the Russians are doing that. They are conquering territory. The territory that they hold today, they really hold it. They hold it like in Mariupol, something that people are not discussing. Mariupol reopened schools. Mariupol, the supermarkets have reopened in Mariupol. During this whole Azovstal psychodrama, the Russians are coming in, they are cleaning it up. They have bulldozers cleaning up the streets, and they are planning to redo the city, and they are doing the same thing in other areas that they are holding. They are here forever. They are not going to leave this territory. And I think it's very important for people to understand that. And once you realize that, you realize, wow, this is an incredible war of conquest that happens so fast. That's what I think.
From CP Lay says, hi guys, good information. Thank you for that. Reza says, appreciate your hard work. Alex Alexander, thank you. Thank you for that super chat as well. Rich says, against Russian nuclear and diesel electric submarines armed with hypersonic, supersonic weaponry and the electronic warfare, the U.S. Navy will be fried in the Arctic.
The Russian military systems, including their submarines, so far are much better adapted to conflict in the Arctic than American ones are. And this is where the Russians have one particular advantage, because they don't have the global commitments that the United States does. So they're able to design their submarines with more area-specific features than the US, which has to send their submarines everywhere. So, for example, the US doesn't use diesel electric submarines because it has to have submarines deployed in every part of the world, whereas the Russians can deploy diesel electric submarines, and they've developed a particular type of submarine which is specifically designed, the larger class, which is specifically designed to operate in this part of the world, in the Arctic.
Well, there's also something else in general about Russian weapon systems compared to American weapon systems. The U.S. tries to create weapons that can do it all, whereas the Russians try to do very specific weapons that do one task and do it very, very well. And therefore, their approach is always cheap, efficient, easy to produce, easy to maintain weapons that do just one thing really well. Whereas the Americans have boondoggles like F-35, the F-35 fighter, that's the joint strike fighter that's supposed to do it all, but in fact does nothing particularly well and is exceptionally expensive. And so I think that the Russian approach is proving to be better in terms of actual combat effectiveness than the American approach.
Well, can I just make a quick observation about this? Because you cited a figure of 400,000 rounds of ammunition that the Russians are using in Ukraine every day. Now, the US has supplied Ukraine with 150,000 rounds of ammunition.
That's half a day.
That is less than half of what Russia is using every day. So, I mean, if these figures are, unless I'm missing something, that does give you.
No, that's accurate. That's accurate. And also the other thing to that is that, the 180,000 rounds of ammunition that they're using, they're for different weapon systems.
Yes, I know.
For radically different weapon systems, whereas for the Russians, it's all the same kind. So they don't have a problem that the Americans or the Ukrainians will have.
Yes. Again, while we're just on this subject, because it's something which I actually know a little bit about. I was reading an article by Scott Ritter about the M777 howitzer that the US has deployed. And I noticed that parts of this howitzer use titanium instead of steel. And this apparently creates heavy maintenance issues. I have to say, because this is I used to do this kind of work. The sheer cost of using titanium metal in an artillery piece seems to me to negate any conceivable cost-benefit advantage. I mean, titanium is very strong, but it does have problems, and cracking and all that kind of thing. But regardless, you must be multiplying the expense of these artillery pieces for what I suspect are only very, very marginal gains.
Yeah, but I'm sorry, Alexander, you're missing the point. The point is to have these very expensive equipment so that more money flows to the manufacturer. See, if this equipment breaks down and needs constant maintenance, every maintenance cycle is a few more dollars to the weapons manufacturers. I mean, Alexander, get with the program. See, corruption. That's the program.
Absolutely. Russian guns are all steel, very reliable, very rugged, and they cost far less. I mean, if you know anything about titanium, you know how much less they're going to cost.
Yeah, well, frankly, all I know about titanium is I have a titanium coffee cup, that I have in storage in Chile, and it's very light and very pretty. But is it necessary for something like that? Here's something else. Like Western observers were commenting rather on the Azovstal siege, and they were tutting, in the way that condescending way that they have. They said, "Oh, the Russians aren't using smart bombs to attack Azovstal," and I'm thinking to myself, well, why would you use an incredibly expensive piece of equipment for something that's right there? I mean, you use these very smart bombs and teleguided systems and whatnot when it's far away, when it's 200 kilometers away. But if it's right in front of you, who cares if you use a smart bomb or a dumb bomb? The dumb bomb is cheaper and you've got more of them. But the commentators were saying, this proves that the Russians are running out of smart bombs. They're running out of, sophisticated guided systems. Which it's just such a weird, arrogant, detached from reality kind of point of view that I just don't get it. And by the way, these commentators, they were not armchair generals. They were actual former officers who were making these comments. And you're like, what are you thinking?
Zugzuxi says, agree with you there, Gonzalo. Thank you for that, Zugzuxi. Lee B says, thank you for all that you do. Gentlemen, privileged to be able to listen in on your exchange of ideas. Thank you for that, Lee B. Danielle says, thank you, Alexander, Alex, and Gonzalo, for keeping us sane. Thank you for that, Danielle. And Michael says, BBC has shown its total garbage. Agree with you there, Michael.
I completely agree. Can I just say, I mean, its coverage of the war has been terrible right from the beginning. But when it started last night to talk about the evacuation, about Ukraine arranges evacuation from Azovstal, and that was the lead story. Well, I have to say, I mean, whatever pretense that they're anything other than Zelensky's stenographers has now collapsed. And this is the BBC. I mean, it's actually very sad.
But Bauke says, did you see the video clip United Against the NWO about mercenaries going to fight for Russia? I'm not sure we want all that, but if it was serious, it was interesting.
I haven't seen it.
I
didn't. Yeah.
I can't comment.
United Against the NWO. We'll check it out.
Right, okay.
Yeah. Commander Crossfire says, you will find more concern for the Ukrainian people and the nation in Russia and on Russian media than in Kiev or the West.
I wouldn't be surprised. I'm sure that's true, actually. You Russians have very strong feelings about Ukraine and about Ukrainians. I mean, they still think of Ukrainians as a fraternal nation.
Claudia, thank you for...
It seems to be the case, and this is a subjective appraisal based really on social media, but it seems as if the Russians on social media are making a clear distinction between the crazies of the Zelensky regime and the Azov-Battalion type people and the ordinary Ukrainian. There seems, at least in social media, perhaps it's skewed, it's biased, because the people who are commenting are obviously much more interested, and therefore they're much more knowledgeable than the average Russian citizen. But I don't think that there'd be that much of a dichotomy between the average Russian citizen and the person who's more on top of the news, in terms of thinking, yes, the Ukrainians are like us. They're a brother people, and over there are these crazy Nazis that we want no part of.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Jungle Jin says there is no defense to hypersonic missiles and gliders. What happens when the West catches up? Will Russia's air defenses, e.g., S-550, cope?
The Russians believe that they can develop air defenses to hypersonic weapons. And of course, since they're the pioneers in hypersonic technology, I would presume that they would be able to do that. But, I'm not going to speculate too much because I don't know. All I will say is, if anybody's going to develop successful and effective defenses to hypersonic systems, it most probably will be the Russians, because they're far ahead of everybody in air defense technology, as this war has shown.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the unspoken stories about this war is the success of Russian air defense systems. I mean, that's one reason why drones have proved so completely ineffectual.
And that's also why this talk about a no-fly zone over Ukraine died on the vine quite some weeks ago, because it was just absurd. It was just saying, let's make sure that the sky is green. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
The Seattle Sideshow says, what European country has the strongest economy right now moving forward?
Good question.
Hungary.
Russia? Hungary.
Russia, sure.
Yeah,
but I mean,
if we're talking within the EU, I mean, Hungary's been doing quite well, and it's actually taking steps to protect its economy. All of the others, it seems to me, are, busy doing what they can to undermine their economies as fast as they can.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, Alexander. I'm sorry, Alex. I want to ask you something that I heard that I'm confused about. There seems to, and Alexander, perhaps you're really on top of it because it's an issue of British politics, which is there seems to be some sort of scandal emerging about Boris Johnson and the intelligence services, that they essentially positioned him as the prime minister. I'm not understanding it. I sort of like caught a glimpse of this. Please fill me in if you don't mind.
Well, I can't really, because it's all rumor and speculation at the moment. The thing to understand about Johnson is that, of course, he is always the target of rumor and speculation and things of this kind. But all I will say about this is that there are reports to this effect, and they're not new. I mean, I can remember this going back many years. I would be surprised if the entirety of the intelligence agencies took this view, because, of course, he was a supporter of leave, exit from the EU. And it's fairly well known that the intelligence services, as a totality, wanted to keep Britain in the EU. So, I can't say, certainly that, the entire intelligence community wanted Johnson. But there are reports which I have seen and which are old, which is that when he did become foreign secretary, this is before he became prime minister, under Theresa May's government, he had a meeting with the intelligence services, and he'd gone into that meeting saying that Britain should improve relations with Russia, and he came out of that meeting saying Britain should fight the Russians to the last ounce because they're such a menace to the world. So, he's got some kind of background with the intelligence services that I don't really know very much about, but it's all very speculative at the moment. I don't think he's going to be prime minister for very long, by the way. I think we can already see sort of people circling around him. And I would also add that the general mood in Britain is very dark at the moment. The economic picture is deteriorating. Sterling has also not been doing well against the dollar. The Bank of England gave an apocalyptic, their own words, a prediction about where food prices were going. So there's this is not a good time in Britain.
Okay.
Claudia, thank you for that super chat. Seku Drame, thank you for that super sticker. Jamila, thank you for that super sticker. AP says, I'm blown away that Khazarian Mafia is allowing you guys to talk about them. Props to the most based political podcast on YouTube.
I have no idea what you're talking about. No comment, no comment, no comment.
No comment at all.
Thank you, AP, for that. Jam says, this one's a good one. Ukraine government is Amber Heard, while the DPR and the LPR is Johnny Depp. Well said, Jam. David March says, Russia is fortunate that Zelensky is doing his best impression of Stalin's not one step back. Any good commander would have retreated his army back across the river to the west by now.
I mean, this is. I agree. I should say that Stalin's famous "not one step back" comes from one particular speech. It wasn't actually a speech; it was an order that he gave, which is right up to which basically set the scene for the Battle of Stalingrad. So he basically said, we are losing the war, we're retreating, and he listed all the places we're retreating. The Germans are advancing here, the Germans are advancing there. We're losing territory, we're losing population, we're losing economic strength. Russia may be big, but it's not limitless. This is the point where we've got to make our stand and not a step back from this point on. So that was that, just providing that historic context. In other occasions, he was prepared to order retreats. So Zelensky's going far beyond anything that Stalin did, because Zelensky is not a military person. He is somebody who works in media. So he is pursuing, in my opinion, a media war. And he wants to show that he's on the attack, that he's on the offensive. He doesn't want to retreat or organize withdrawals because, of course, they don't look good in his media world.
Yeah, I mean, bottom line, Ukraine is the past master at information warfare, but the Russians are winning the actual war, and only one of them matters in the end. This is a catastrophe. Also, there's something else too. You have to keep in mind that the people around Zelensky, who are these Azov neo-Nazi crazy types, we keep saying Azov, but that's really just a metonym for a whole group, a whole panoply, rogues gallery of neo-Nazis and insane people. And so do keep that in mind. But anyway, this group that surrounds Zelensky, they are terrified of the Russians because the Russians have said, we are going to capture you. We are going to hold you responsible for what's going on, what's happened in Donetsk. We're going to hold you responsible for the murder of those 42 people in Odessa back in 2014, the burning of the workers. What was the name of the tragedy?
In Odessa. In Odessa, the one in the trade union building.
The trade
union, right. Yeah. And so, they're terrified of the Russians. And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to put the Ukrainian people between themselves and the Russians, and throwing up all this nonsense about, you're defending the motherland, Ukraine, Slava Ukraina and all that. But they're really just trying to save their hides and save the money that they have outside of Ukraine. Zelensky has a personal fortune that is in excess of $500 million. This is known. This was known before the war. It was exposed in Western media. It's not something that we're just making up. And this was known how corrupt he is. I mean, do keep in mind, Ukraine is a country with a gross national product before the war of 160 billion. And this man had $500 million that he had stolen in 3 years. It's money that he stole from the Ukrainian people. And so they're terrified of being held responsible for their corruption and their evil. And they're willing to sacrifice the Ukrainian people to save themselves. Never forget that.
Mike Galtambro says the Ukrainian defensive line in Donbass is breaking up.
Yeah.
True. Yes. Very true. Yes. Zuxi says, is this a Rubicon moment?
Yes, I think it is actually, in terms of the war. And it was if the war takes a particular turn in the way that we expect, then it will be a geopolitical turning point too.
EILK says, in 2013, I met with the VP of the National Bank of Ukraine, who told me that the treasure is completely is completely empty. The treasury is completely empty. I asked, so what's next? His answer, war, because that's the best way to hide stolen assets.
Interesting story. Gosh, yeah.
Thank you for that. Trenton says, fuel, question mark.
Gonzalo, what is the situation with fuel?
There isn't, exactly.
Okay.
There you go.
And the ministry, I think it was the Minister of Transportation here in Ukraine, I do believe it was her, foolishly said a few days ago, like 3-4 days ago, that Ukraine only had fuel for 10 more days, the people. Okay. And I've seen it. I mean, the lines for gasoline and whatever gasoline is quickly eaten up, is quickly gone, insofar as that, the whole country is slowly breaking down. Okay, it would have been much faster if the Russians had attacked infrastructure, and that shows that the Russians never had any intention of hurting the civilian population because they didn't attack that infrastructure. But with the break of the train resupply from the west, and the destruction of refineries in Ukraine. It was inevitable that the civilian population would get to a point of just not having any fuel. And we are getting to that point, as I understand it, at this time, less than a week's supply is left. That's as far as I know. I could be wrong. More supplies could be found. Who knows? But that's the state of play at this time, as I understand it.
Steve-O says, Alex Jones is right. The middle class is the target. Well said, Steve-O. Carol says, please follow the Canadian general being held in Moscow. What is the Russian game plan? Public War Crimes Tribunal? If so, the ultimate PR checkmate.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that. I should say the Russians have not confirmed that they're holding such a person. Let's see what the Russians do. I mean, as I said previously, Bostrykhin, who is the head of the investigative committee, has been in Donbass. He's sent teams of investigators there. The FSB, as Gonzalo said, is also at work. Something is coming.
Lazaro says, first time ever donating on YouTube, Puerto Rican living in Germany and seeing the awful prices rising daily. Keep up the good work. Thank you for that, Lazaro. CS Lover says, while talking about Ukraine, lawmakers are quietly working to bring in new COOF restrictions. 4 billion vax doses have been ordered for the EU, mandatory fourth shot imposed after the summer. The vax pass to be reintroduced too.
I'm going to just make a guess, which is that, if things go badly wrong from a US point of view, a Biden administration point of view, in Ukraine this summer, you're going to see a refocus on dealing with the pandemic in the autumn.
Gentlemen, let's just, this is the idea I wanted to explore. I was thinking about it just now, which is what happens if the Russians win decisively, as we all expect, and the situation sort of like deteriorates? What would be the political reaction of the Europeans and the Americans? Do you think that they would just like sweep it all under the rug, change the subject, and pretend that it never happened, such as they did in the United States, at least after the BLM riots and the election? That it just never happened and just gone.
Yeah. I think that's what they would do in the US, and I think they might even succeed, actually. In Europe, far more difficult. In Britain, they might just about get away with it because, we're reasonably remote from the battlefields. And we're affected, obviously. We have rising prices, but I don't think this is really quite as central to us. But in Germany, if there was a defeat in Ukraine, a visible defeat, I think you would probably see big economic, big political moves. I'm not sure how they would go, though. And I don't want to predict how it would happen, but it would have a big effect in Germany.
P. Walker says Stoltenberg, more like Doltenberg.
Yes, agree.
Liam, thank you for that super chat. Bauke says
Putin,
Putin.
By the way, very witty. Yeah, very
witty.
Very
good. Bauke says Putin meant we currently have no issues with Finland, but the ambiguity in his words is understandable and should have been avoided. So
I understand that. I was reading the Kremlin's website readout, and I didn't think it was as ambiguous as people said. Well, as I said, what he was basically doing is he was criticizing the US and also NATO itself, obviously, but the US. He says you're dragooning, you're dragging countries into NATO to pursue your geopolitical objectives, and creating trouble between us and these countries where there was no trouble before. We had perfectly good relations with Finland and Sweden. Actually, Russian relations with Sweden have never been particularly good, but anyway, that's another story. But we've not had any quarrel with these countries. Now we do.
One sec. Stevo Bulkovo says, cheers, Alexander. Spot on. Thank you for that, Stevo. Camus79 says, do you guys think that the PLA will be visiting Taiwan soon? Will Xi Jinping be spending his holidays in Taipei?
Well, I had an interesting conversation about this particular issue. I think that the Chinese are going to go in very passive-aggressive and very low-key maneuvers to hurt the United States without actually invading Taiwan. Because you all know that Shanghai has been in a lockdown, a severe lockdown, for going on 60 days, I do believe. And the word I've been hearing from a couple of different people whom I trust, and whom you both know, but I won't reveal it because it was told to me in confidence. I'll tell you guys later. Sorry, chat. But I was told that by a couple of smart people that the lockdowns in Shanghai were not because of the coup, but rather to hurt the American economy, because so much of American trade is Shanghai focused. And by shutting down Shanghai, it really hurts the Americans disproportionately than if they shut down any other city in China. I had heard this about a month ago when this lockdown first started, or had gone into its fourth week. But it's been confirmed by a couple of other people, and I'm tending to think, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the reason, and this is the approach that the Chinese are going to take, of like shutting down different facets of their economy with the excuse of the coup, not because they're trying to, they actually have an outbreak, but rather to deliberately target American businesses and the American economy overall, to weaken it in this passive-aggressive, almost underground manner. What do you all think of this?
I have to say I'm a little skeptical of that story. I mean,
yeah. Go ahead.
It is doing real damage to the Chinese economy, and I tend to think that the real problem here is that Xi Jinping and the Chinese officials took this approach that they were going to be completely wipe out the pandemic. They bragged about how successful they were. They compared their success with that of the US. And there's been lots of stories in the Chinese media about this. And the result is they've trapped themselves into a position where they're imposing these lockdowns, doing real damage to their own economy as a result. And I think that they are finding it very difficult politically to retreat from this. And I mean, I'm going to say also, I think the policy is irrational. I mean, whatever the logic of lockdowns might have been in, when this all began in 2020, in China, I mean, it's clearly not working now. I mean, it's clearly working now.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, we won't know now at any rate. We might know someday in the future, but who knows? Yeah. But it just seems very compelling, because I agree with you. And I think that everybody sensible, after 2 years especially, realizes that lockdowns really don't change anything. And they cause a lot more damage to the mental health of people and to young people, to children. It's devastating in ways that do not correspond to the perceived good that is accruing from these measures. But precisely because of that, it just seems very compelling and sort of plausible in an insane kind of way that the Chinese would be doing this deliberately in an attempt to hurt the American economy. I mean, I'm not going to push the issue. I'm just really just putting it there as a possibility. I'm on the fence about it, to tell you the truth. I see the logic of it, and I wouldn't put it past the Chinese, because the Chinese have done other things that are equally crazy, if not more crazy, that had a certain bizarre logic that oddly worked out for them in the end. So who knows?
David Franco says, so glad to see you're alive, Coach. I hope you are well. Thank you, David.
Yes. Oh, by the way, I just have to say to the chat, on Twitter and my channel, I put out on Twitter, I put out a long thread saying I am free from cancer, and on my videos, I put a video called "I am free from cancer." I'm cancer free. It's a joke. You have to watch the videos and read it to understand what the joke is. Okay, I was commenting on propaganda and how easy it is to manipulate people into having a completely erroneous view of reality. Because the joke was, I'm free from cancer, but I've never actually been diagnosed with cancer, so of course I'm free from cancer, you know. And my point was that that's how propagandists work. They tell you something, and they hide the key bit of information. Okay, I'm saying this long-windedly on your program, and forgive me for taking up your time, because so many people have actually sent me messages, trying to raise my spirits, and it's so heartwarming. But on the other hand, I want to strangle them, okay, because it was a joke, okay. So I'm just to set the record straight. It was a joke to make a point, and I'm sorry that the joke got out of hand. I just want to say that to clarify.
All right. Stefan says Taiwan won't have the same capability to fight as the Ukraine does because, number one, there is no military laws in Taiwan. Anything happened goes to regular civil court. And number two, if the temperature is over 30 degrees Celsius, it's forbidden to have outdoor training. Thank you for that.
Interesting.
Thank you. Fox 2232 says, truth is the end of society that stands on lies. Well said, Fox 22. Lee B says, one more donation because I'm a huge fan. Extra money for napitok. Napitok, drink in Russian. Thank you for that. Sanjeva says, when Putin talked about Finland, Sweden, and NATO, it wasn't acceptance, but an admission of the limits of Russia's power. This is realpolitik. Don't have to like it, but it's reality.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that is a very good point. I mean, the Russians have a realist view, and they do understand the limits of their own power. The Americans don't, or at least the neocons don't. I mean, there are plenty of people in the United States who have an understanding of the limits of US power. But the neocons do not accept that the United States power has any limits. The Russians understand that very well. But as I said, I've already discussed what Putin actually said about Finland and Sweden. And certainly, I mean, he's not looking to go to war with Finland or Sweden over this issue. But that doesn't mean that, he's accepted this. He's simply pointing out Russia has no historic issues with Finland or Sweden. And now it does, to serve the geopolitical interests of someone else, which is the United States.
Steve Bulgakov says, Finns worked hard after World War II. Sweden made a killing selling steel to both Germans and allies during World War II. I love my Sweden, but are ashamed of our leaders.
I agree. Well, thank you for that,
Steve.
Yeah.
Jungle Jin says, why hasn't Russia demanded rubles for its commodity exports, including oil, wheat, fertilizers, and metals?
It's coming. It's coming. Now, I mean, they've already said that gas for rubles is the first. They'll then be moving on to oil for rubles for unfriendly countries. But, bear in mind that this can only be an incremental thing anyway, because you've got to create a system, the payment systems that people can use. Now, with Europe, there is a payment system because it can be created through Gazprom Bank, and that is functioning smoothly. But if you're talking about other things, well, it takes more time. But eventually they will go over to that with unfriendly countries, with countries like India, with China, whatever. It'll be moving towards a more sophisticated system, which will involve the currencies of these countries being accepted by the Russians in payments and other things like this. So it'll be a more sophisticated thing with friendly countries, but with unfriendly countries, the ruble will eventually become the currency in which trade is conducted.
SWJ Morris says, West has been in auto-destruct mode for the last 2 years. Nothing has changed.
Yeah, well, I know,
Thank you
but
for that.
well, one thing has changed. We've put our foot on the accelerator and have been
Yes.
pressing down hard. At least in Europe, we have.
Yeah. Zuxi says you can have all the weapons in the world, but without ammo, they are useless.
Yeah, absolutely true.
Very true.
Correct. I mean, yeah.
Habib says, what you guys of the murder of Shireen Abu Akleh? Gonzalo said the Israeli soldier was confused. He shot her accidentally. They tried to kill
No, I
the
didn't
rest
say
of
that.
her crew. Is that by accident,
Yeah.
Gonzalo?
No, I didn't say that. I said I could understand if it had been an accident. Okay, I didn't say it was an accident because nobody knows, because there's been no investigation. It was clearly a murder that was carried out by a killing, rather, that was carried out by an Israeli Defense Force sniper. Now, it could be that the sniper, a round slipped out, and he had no intention of killing her, and it happened. Or it could have been a deliberate assassination. At this time, it is unclear what has happened. I never said that there was an accident. On the contrary, I said that because I did a video yesterday about this topic, or a couple of days ago, and just to be very clear, I am not excusing the killing of this journalist. I'm saying in that video, I was emphasizing the fact of how the Israelis attacked the mourners and provoked the mourners, and I was saying how American and Israeli strategy seems to be to constantly provoke violent reaction from people and then blame the violent reaction for the start of the conflict. And insofar as the murder or the death or killing of this journalist, I do not know at this time if it was a premeditated murder or if it was an accident. Therefore, it would be, Alexander, you're a lawyer, it would be manslaughter, I suppose. I don't know.
I'm not good, because obviously one mustn't get into too many hypothetical discussions. Murder and manslaughter and all of these things, the criteria vary from one country to another. But, in Britain, it could be manslaughter. It could even be murder in some particular situations. But I don't want to discuss a particular incident, which I really don't know much about. And whereas you rightly said, there's not yet been an investigation. So I don't want to say that somebody has done something like that without actually knowing about it. The point I think you were making is that this was a death that was caused by a Israeli soldier, and that the media wanted to avoid mentioning that fact.
Exactly. And they want to avoid the brutality that was carried out in the funeral of this journalist, which I found truly reprehensible.
Sanjeva says, how come Turkey has an inflation of 70%? Your prognosis for its economy in the next decade? I heard European banks are heavily leveraged in Turkey, and hence Turkey is too big to fail.
Well, indeed. I mean, there's lots of stories about this. The reason Turkey has a 70% inflation, and it could go higher, I mean, there's talking about 100% inflation by the end of the year, is a combination of many things. I mean, firstly, there's the worldwide inflation, which has hurt Turkey significantly. Secondly, it's the economic policies of the Erdogan government, which have been very much directed at very, very heavy spending. Then there's the extremely eccentric monetary policies of the Erdogan government, which I know many people have tried to explain and justify, but which basically consider interest rates to be, a terrible thing, and they don't really look to control the currency in that kind of way. And then there are certain structural problems within the Turkish economy itself, which also contribute to inflation. There's lots of things playing out here, but I would say this: a government like Erdogan's could have brought this situation under some sort of control. I mean, we shouldn't be looking at 70% or 100% inflation in Turkey. A more conventional economic policy would have avoided this. It is, in my opinion, something which Erdogan has himself created.
Rich says Poland, with its leadership history, is a reason the Russian army comes for a visit every 60, 70 years.
Oh, dear. I can see that.
I'm not going to comment on that. I know a lot of Polish people, so I'm not going to call myself.
And so do I, and they're very good friends. And by the way, I should add, not a Russophobic bone amongst them.
Lee B says, imagine there really is a global cabal conspiracy agenda. Do you think Putin is fighting against it or for it?
Well, he's fighting against it. I mean, again, we come across this question many times, but I cannot believe that Putin has such a fanatical personality that he would be supporting an agenda of this kind, which would lead to the kind of attacks and criticisms of him that are regularly made, with the threats to haul him up before a war crimes trial. I mean, he just doesn't come across to me as that kind of a person at all.
No, what strikes me about Putin is, I heard this about some French politician, that he is a cynic about everything except the Russian nation.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that Putin is a nationalist.
Yes.
I do not believe he is an ethnic nationalist, an ethno-nationalist.
No.
But he is certainly a nationalist, a Russian, and very proudly Russian. And like I said, I think that he is a cynic about everybody and everything, but he has not an idealized vision of Russia, but certainly a goal as to what kind of nation he wants to leave behind. I think, too, something that people don't quite seem to understand is that, judo fighter that he has always understood when it is smart to go along to get along, and when to make a move against a particular group or a particular person that he can take on finally. Okay. Yeah. Like, for instance, with the oligarchs. In early on in his administration, he made it clear to the oligarchs, look, if you don't get involved in politics and you just stick to making money, I'll leave you alone. You leave me alone, you stay in your lane, and I'll stay in my lane. And the only oligarchs who suffered were the ones who didn't stay in their lane, and they paid for it, and either by exile or imprisonment. The others, they realized, it's not worth it, but we can still make money. But what was interesting is that over the decades, most of those old oligarchs are gone, and they've been replaced by others, and a lot more. Each of these oligarchs with less power than the previous wave of oligarchs, which is very interesting of how he is handling that particular problem. And I'm just focusing on the oligarch issue just to sort of like show you that, or buttress the argument that Putin looks at things long term. He understands that his position is rock solid, that he will be the president or the actual leader of Russia until the day he dies. And at this stage, he is clearly not interested in, they keep saying that, he has mansions and yachts. He doesn't care about that. That's not his priority. He doesn't care about being invited to the cool parties in the Mediterranean or in the, in Mallorca or wherever. He's interested in history. He wants to cement his position with the great leaders of Russia. That's his priority. And so you have to understand the man and where he's coming from and what are his priorities and desires. It seems very clear because he keeps telling people what he wants. The weird thing is that the rest of the world doesn't seem to pay attention to his words. They keep projecting onto him their own desires as opposed to listening to what he says that he desires, which is, of course, important.
Liam, thank you for that super chat. Toilet Sauce says there are unconfirmed reports circulating right now that 16,000 Ukrainian troops may already be encircled near Severodonetsk.
Yeah, I've heard the same. I mean, I've heard a lower number than that, 8,000, but that might have been purely Severodonetsk itself, and it could be that the entire pocket or cauldron or trap, or call it whatever you like, is bigger.
Tony, thank you for joining Duran community. Nicola, thank you for that super chat. Elena Diaz says, so if Sweden and Finland are not accepted to NATO, they would have forfeited neutrality for nothing. Correct?
Absolutely. And as I said, Erdogan's comments today have been exceptionally strong. I mean, if you take them at their face, he's going to vote against NATO membership in June. I don't expect that to happen. But if it does, it's a disaster for the governments of those two countries.
RDDR says, is there a contradiction in turning a Soviet republic into a European nation state?
Well,
They did
Not
with Baltic.
necessarily. You could do it with the Baltics. I mean, some of these Soviet republics are genuine nation states. Armenia, Georgia, these are nation states. So, I mean, I can't say that all of them are not nation states, but there are others where, it's a lot more complicated. And I'm afraid Ukraine is arguably the most complicated of the lot.
Euro Gabor says, how will Germany pay for the great social engineering into diversity as our strength if the politicians will cripple their industry? More money printing. The EU will be gone in a decade. Orban smiles.
I think you're quite possibly completely right. I mean, but ideologues never worry about these things. I mean, they're confident that, the solution will come. I mean, if you believe Robert Habeck, all you have to do is build windmills and all will be well.
Rinex Tag says,
windmills, everything is better.
Rinex Tag says, wasn't 2008 Georgia war something connected to Ukraine?
I think it was, because what happened was in 2008, there was that NATO meeting in Budapest, and the NATO said that one day Georgia and Ukraine would become members of NATO. There's actually an official statement to that effect, but not just yet. And one of the reasons was that there were these issues in Georgia's case about these territories that were not under Georgian control. So Saakashvili, who was the president of Georgia and was very, very keen to get Georgia into NATO, he started the war in 2008 because he thought that if he could gain control of South Ossetia and ultimately Abkhazia, that would open his way to join NATO. And so you can see that this offer to Georgia, this invitation ultimately to Georgia and Ukraine, which was made at the same time, at the same summit meeting, to join NATO, is the source of all this trouble.
Carol Jones says, the U.S. general could have been confused with the Canadian general. Now in Moscow, we Canadians are always confused with Americans internationally.
We
have to wait. We have to wait.
We'll have to wait. Let's wait and see. I mean, what exactly?
Sparky says Ukraine would be much better off under Russia than under carpetbaggers and NAZIs, as it's been for the last 30 years.
Well, possibly, but it could have. I still believe this. If it had run its affairs well and had been left alone, who knows? It might have done very well by itself. It has all the resources, but that never happened. And of course, there's no going back.
Matt Lisek says, looks like Turkey is walking a tightrope between Russia and NATO, but what is Kazakhstan doing? Seems like Russia intervened in their coup attempt in January, yet Erdogan is also courting them.
Indeed, he is, and he's now made a deal to start drone production in Kazakhstan, or so I understand. But Tokayev, the Kazakh president, has just been in Moscow again, where he's attended a CSTO summit, and it looks as if they're edging towards setting up a joint military headquarters. This is all the CSTO states. So, military integration, but Erdogan is still playing his complicated games in Central Asia, and the Kazakhs appear to be drawing him along.
Yeah, but I also, if I were Erdogan, I'd be very, very nervous, because it was clear that he had some fingerprints over the Kazakhstan color revolution that didn't quite happen. And from what I understand, it really freaked out the Chinese. And because they didn't want to have that particular problem right on their doorstep. And so I think that, and they blame Erdogan. I think that Erdogan has created some very powerful enemies. I think that the Russians and Putin understand that Erdogan likes to play his games, sort of like playing both sides off the middle. But I don't think that the Chinese really are of the understanding nature, if you will, insofar as what Erdogan did. And I think that there will be payback. And I think that it's going to be really, they're going to hit him when he's at his weakest, which is what the Chinese usually do.
Yeah. Jamie 99 says, is this like Lord of the Flies playing out on a global scale?
Kind of.
Oh gosh.
Well said.
I hope not. Well said, yeah.
And who's Piggy? That's the question. Is Boris Johnson Piggy, or what, you know?
Well, indeed.
Boris Johnson. That's true. Boris Johnson. Bruno, thank you for that super sticker. Bauke says the U.S. is currently not fighting on any fronts. Very true. Thank you for that. Matlis says Serbia and Hungary are two neighboring landlocked countries. How can they have any hope of maintaining Russian energy supplies without Hungary crossing into Western Ukraine and Russia moving further west?
Well, at the moment, there has been, they're still getting their energy through these pipelines built by the Soviet Union, by the way. But of course, if they're interrupted, then Hungary and Serbia are going to be in very difficult positions. And that may actually make some important political decisions going forward that they probably don't want to make at the moment. In other words, they might have to sort of speak to Moscow and see whether they can coordinate something in Ukraine. But we'll see. We're not there yet. Let's wait and see.
Kurt says NATO is incredibly weak in the Arctic. The drills they had resulted in frozen equipment. Russian equipment has coating which prevents freezing.
Absolutely. That is completely true. There's been much discussion about this. The Russians at the moment have an overwhelming advantage in the Arctic. But of course, things can change. We'll see.
Alan says, any comments on the U.S. invading Somalia?
Oh,
yeah, I heard about that. That just happened. I don't know enough to know, number one, why would they bother, and what's to be gained there. So I don't really know. Do you guys?
Well, no, nor do I. And I mean, I'm puzzled by it because I seem to remember that when they were last in Somalia, it didn't end very well. I mean, was it the helicopter that got shot down? And there was even a film about it.
Yeah.
Or
Toilet Sauce says, did anyone notice no more pictures of long cash queues in the metro? It's almost as if people simply downloaded domestic digital payment alternatives and went on with life the same evening. But never forget, Russia doesn't make anything. Excellent point.
True.
Very true. And McDonald's is leaving Russia as well. And you're going to have a new restaurant chain. Reach says the best example is the Soviet Union after all the casualties combined in World War II, Russian Civil War, and World War I, which became the superpower, and its casualties are off the scale, almost equal to 45 million.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as I said, it's a fallacy that long wars make countries weaker. It depends on the terms of the victory. I mean, I just say this, but provided victory is achieved, long wars often make countries stronger.
Because what happens is it's not a straight economic issue. It's an issue of the mentality of the people, the confidence that a clear victory, a clear military victory instills in the people. That they walk simply with head held high. They feel we're winners. And it's economists often talk about the animal spirits. Well, here we go. This is an issue where you can have a completely annihilated, physically annihilated country and yet feel incredibly confident about the future because you are the victor in a prolonged war, which is exactly what happened to the Soviet Union at the end of the Second World War. The Soviet Union was destroyed, and yet it felt confident and moved forward confidently. I think that Russia will be pretty much the same at the end of this conflict. Yes.
GEC812 says, Saakashvili, a U.S. deep state puppet. We can blame him for the Russian intervention in Georgia. He would do little without okay from his handlers.
Oh, yeah, I agree with that.
Specifically John McCain. Exactly.
I agree with that too.
His mentor was McCain. Lee B says, do you think with all that's going on, evil is a real idea?
Evil is a real idea. Evil is a reality. I mean, I've encountered it. I mean, I've said in a previous program, I think, that I used to have to go. One of the jobs I used to have was to go to and meet people in the cells underneath the Royal Courts of Justice in London. And I encountered some very evil things and people there. So, the evil is a reality. But, when we discuss these issues like Ukraine, we mustn't put aside these things, but we must also, I think, take a very practical approach to them also, and maybe not be too influenced by these big existential moral questions as well.
Jungle Jin says, why not just ban the ruble? Is this possible?
They have.
Well, they have, to all intents and purposes. Try. If you got rubles, if you're holding rubles in London, try and change them. You can't.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, in terms of investing, I know a number of investors with a lot of access to a lot of funds. I mean, a great deal, quite frankly, who are finding it incredibly difficult to get into the ruble, and they want to. They want to get into ruble assets, but it's just so complicated because since the West divorced itself from the ruble, at this time, it seems that a lot of Westerners, what they are basically doing is that they are setting up offshore businesses, opening Chinese accounts, and from these Chinese accounts, trying to hook up with the Russian accounts and be able to invest that way. But it's a very complicated, convoluted way to invest. And these are motivated investors, and they're having a hard time. So for the average retail investor, forget it. You as a practical matter, you're never going to be able to invest in the ruble or in Russia, which will be to your detriment, unfortunately.
Jungle Jin says Modi and the BJP are theocratic fascists. How does the India-Russia friendship survive this, given India's socialist origins?
Straightforward. It's in their mutual interest. So there may be huge ideological differences, but because it is in the mutual interest of both countries, it's preserved on that basis. And that's always the case with Russian policies. I mean, other countries tend to worry a great deal about, the ideologies and opinions of a particular country. The Russians get on with everybody. They get on with MBS in Saudi Arabia, for example.
Rit says competition is when you have capable manufacturing left, not some service-based economy. Russia and China have solid manufacturing, whereas the U.S. doesn't.
Well, indeed. And by the way, I was actually looking at some of the figures here, and on Russian manufacturing, I mean, I'd assumed that U.S. manufacturing was much greater. It's not. It's not as big a difference as one might think in terms of steel production. It seems almost about the same levels.
Well, then that means that the Russian steel production is this in tons of steel produced per year?
I believe so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, because if it was in nominal terms, then if the figures are similar, that means that Russia is at least twice, if not 3 times as much, because of the famous Big Mac index. You guys know what I'm talking about, right?
Yes.
So,
but anyway, it's not something I've looked into, to be honest. But I mean, certainly Russia does have an awful lot of manufacturing, and the effect of the sanctions is it's going to have more, because Russian industries are going to emerge to fill in the gaps in the consumer sectors, which have now been vacated.
Sparky says Erdogan's going Erdogan. Erdogan's gone Erdogan. Thank you, Sparky, for that. Noel says
Erdogan.
He's done an Erdogan. Noel says, any thoughts on Biden secretly sending U.S. troops to Somalia? War, and more war.
Well,
we're going to have to look into that. Thank you for that super chat, Noel. And Matlis says the U.S. fighting a war on 2 fronts. Looks like the U.S. is opening up another front in Africa, with Biden sending troops to Somalia and having U.S. aid and humanitarian aid to the northeast of Ethiopia. Very, very true. A lot of stuff happening in Africa. Unfortunately, all bad stuff that's happening. Linda, thank you for becoming a new member to the Duran community. Joe Public says, what's your opinion on American exceptionalism?
It's bullshit. To think that you're the exceptional nation, the indispensable nation, what kind of arrogance is this? It's absurd. There is no such thing as an indispensable nation. No, and no nation is exceptional, because exceptionalism, excuse me for ranting, but exceptionalism gives moral license to go and do whatever you want, no matter how morally outrageous it might be, because you're the exceptional nation. I despise this. It is really a despicable notion to think that you are so superior, so exceptional, that you can do whatever you want, invade any country, murder other people, because, you're the exceptional nation. I'm sorry. It really, really bothers me, that notion.
I mean,
But-
the other thing I would add to that is that, of course, the founders of the United States, the people who drew up the Constitution, they actually warned against that type of thinking. They said that the United States should not engage in thinking in that kind of way. But there we go. It's a profoundly un-American way of thinking if you look at American history.
Yes, exactly right. Exactly right. It's really despicable. It's so arrogant and conceited. I'm not going to go on. Sorry, because I'll rant for 10 hours. So yeah, and you guys
Von
only
Raj.
5.5 at most.
Von Raj says South Africa now has unemployment around 55%.
Ooh.
And the higher food prices are the match in the powder keg. Disaster seems unavoidable.
Oh dear.
Yep.
Rinnex tag says for Gonzalo, is the 2008 war in Georgia somewhat connected to Ukraine as a real hope?
I think
I think Gonzalo answered that. Yeah. Thank you for the super chat. Alan B says, any update on the red babushka?
Oh,
I
the
don't have any
British.
update.
The British they were publishing a story that the Ukrainians have interviewed her, and she came. You know, that she was trying to take back what she'd said. I actually read the commentaries in the British media, and it didn't seem to be as if she was taking back anything that she said. But anyway, there we go.
Well, what's happened is that the Ukrainians got to her, and she's an elderly lady, and they convinced her that even though it turns out that the Ukrainians deliberately shelled her house to destroy it, and they told her that it was the Russians who did it, so she would denounce the Russians. And it was just more PR nonsense. And I hope that this poor woman comes out all right from this whole situation, because she's being manipulated. I mean, the original video was clearly organic, and the movement that came out of it in Russia was clearly organic. But now, unfortunately, the Zelensky PR machine has taken it over, and who knows how that'll turn out. My only hope is that the poor lady and her husband make out all right from this whole situation.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Linda, thank you for that super sticker. Harry C. Smith says, I learned dual citizenship is prohibited in Ukraine, but that doesn't stop Zelensky from getting it. Also, Kolomoisky has multiple passports. True.
Kolomoisky, the oligarch, had a famous saying. He said, because he has Ukrainian, Israeli, and Cypriot passports. And he said, yes, it's illegal to have 2 passports, but there's nothing in Ukrainian law that prevents you from having 3.
That's the workaround. Get 3 passports. Herding's Cats says, can someone explain to me why the EU seems to want a weak Germany? Who would profit from that?
Bill, the EU wants weak member states. It wants so that it can centralize power in Brussels. That's very much what they've been trying to achieve all along. So, of course, it wants a weak Germany. It wants a weak everybody.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, of course, it doesn't want a stronger Italy, a stronger Spain to counterbalance strong France and strong Germany. No, everybody has to go down. You know, the typical socialist communist approach to things, that you don't raise people, you pull them down.
Not intimidated says, great live stream. It's not a war. It's a special military operation on steroids. Thank you very much. Not intimidated for that.
Well,
John says,
sorry to say something. He's absolutely right, because we have not seen the Russians go to war. This is a special military operation, and absolutely right. When they go to war, it's a completely different animal insofar as the Russians are concerned. And so, yeah, we should be thankful that it is not a war and that it is a special military operation.
Yeah. Zahir, thank you for that super chat. Marsha Plux, welcome to the Duran community. John, keep up the good work. Thank you, John, for that. Olga says, thank you to all 3 of you to be so brave and objective. I do look forward to your new videos every single day. Thank you, Olga, for that. Mark, thank you for that awesome super chat. Thank you very much, Mark, for that. Jahangir says, America is coward picking small countries. It won't go after both Russia and China. So it will close Ukraine and go after China. But what happens if Russia and China go after the US together?
Well, I don't think that's what they plan to do, actually. I don't think either China or Russia have any plans to attack the United States, because I think from their point of view, they probably feel the time is on their side. But what might happen is we might get into a conflict like we've seen with Ukraine over Taiwan, and that's the real danger for me.
Liam Barrett says, guys, what's your reaction to Scott Ritter's interview with Garland Nixon, where he said Russia will need to step it up or lose in relation to continuing the arms shipments to Ukraine?
I think that Scott should sometimes take some time to consider his opinions, and he should take some time to think through some of the positions that he believes, because sometimes, with more facts emerge, maybe your first knee-jerk reaction is not the accurate one. So I would say that to Scott, to just take a little time and not quite assume something so quickly, which might not be borne out by the facts. I would say that.
We've done a program, not specifically about Scott, but covering the very points that some of the points that you made.
It'll be up later today, most likely, or tomorrow. Peter Liu says lockdown hurt China, especially retail and EV sales in April. China developing anti-COOF drugs, mRNA, and Omicron-specific vaccines, building new permanent COOF hospitals and testing sites before replacing zero COOF policy. Otherwise, 1 to 2 million Chinese may die. That's a very big super chat from Peter. Thank you very much for that. So Peter's explaining what's going on in China. Any comments, guys?
No,
so we're gonna have to move on because we have
because
we're pressed on time. Kurt says, but thank you, Peter, for that. Any comments there, Gonzalo?
No, not from me.
Okay. Thank you, Peter, for explaining that. Ryan says, do you think Trudeau is jealous of Zelensky for actually making it as an actor and not doing and not becoming a drama teacher? Love your work in upstate Canadian. Thank you. That's fantastic, Ryan. Thank you for that.
Fantastic.
Mean, Ryan. Yeah, that's pretty good.
Kurt says, everybody who did not sleep in math class knows that if you have 3 of something, you also have 2. Comment to the dual passport story. Very true. But math is so yesterday, Kurt. G-Dog says, typical communist, what the fuck? This is, sorry, excuse my language. What the F? This is 100% imperial capitalism. Thank you very much for that, G-Dog. Where am I here? Throwing the wild card in. Remember the bushfires last year? How well are we all prepared for that this year?
Probably not at all, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I don't think we're prepared for that. Aji, thank you for that super sticker. Let's see. Ermin, thank you for that super sticker. Tim, thank you for that super sticker. Summer of 1970, thank you for that super chat. New Guardian says Russians bless their weapons.
Every soldier blesses his weapon.
And Gonzalo has done a good piece about Ukrainians being told not to criticize Western weapons.
Right. That was a good video. Yeah,
a very good video.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yes, I like that one. I even referenced it to Gonzalo in a video that I did. I like that one so much. Balkajan says, just watch Putin's 2007 speech in Munich. It is impressive and foretells everything we are seeing today about shared security. That is a fantastic speech. If you can find it on YouTube, definitely find that 2007 speech.
I would suggest you read it, because sometimes with the translation, you don't quite get what he's actually saying, and so I suggest reading it. There are lots of copies floating around, so it's no trouble.
Absolutely. Zariel says, wasn't able to help much, but thank you as always. The Duran FTW. Thank you, Zariel. I don't know what FTW is, but thank you for that, Zariel. Toilet Sauce says, I put
for the win. FTW.
For the win. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Zariel. Toilet Sauce says, I posted a video from a French reporter in Moscow on Locals the other day. He seemed very disappointed by the fact that shops are filled to the brim and life goes on as always.
Yeah, I saw that. That was funny. He was pissed. He was he was mad. He was telling his voice, and there was all this footage of supermarkets in Russia with all these crispy new products, clearly Russian in origin, and they were all neatly arrayed in the supermarket, and he was clearly upset. It was very funny. You have to go and see it. It's
definitely check that on theduran.locals.com. That's where you'll find that video. Sparky says, Hunter S. Lira Gonzalo journalism. Thank you, Sparky. Thank you, Sparky, for that. Journey to the East says, What do you get? What's your guys' take on the U.S. embarrassed the Asian countries by throwing 150 million and then saying share it with your brother, just like I throw 50 pence and then say share it with your brother and use it wisely?
Well,
a penny saved and a penny earned. That's what I have to say.
Yes. Karen says, will the U.S. send nuclear weapons to Ukraine?
No. I think even the US wouldn't do a thing like that, to be honest.
Yeah, and they're not even sending the guidance systems in their howitzers. People have been noticing that the howitzers that the Americans have been sending are lacking the GPS guidance systems.
Yes.
Or firing systems rather.
Yes.
And so
yes, absolutely.
Never
Which means that they, as I understand it, that they can't use extended range munitions, which some people have been talking about.
Exactly. Which sort of like makes it sort of like, why did you send it then? What was the point?
Exactly.
Yura Gabor says Hungary and Serbia receive most of their Russian gas via Turk Stream pipeline and not via Ukraine. The soft underbelly of this pipeline is Bulgaria at the moment with the current leadership.
Yes. You're quite right, actually. You're absolutely right.
And let's see. James Edwards says, jokes about people I like having cancer are not funny. Jokes about people I don't like, on the other hand, are hilarious. Thank you, James, for that. David Franco says, this is off topic, but it is surprising how crazy the current thing meme has become. In reality, we've gone from masks to Ukraine to Roe v. Wade to the great replacement in a matter of 6 months.
Yeah. The current thing is like real. I mean, look, memes pop up because they are reflecting reality. If they weren't reflecting reality, they wouldn't get the popularity that they do. So you have to look at memes like that. They are debris. No, they are. It's like a thermometer. A thermometer registers a certain temperature because that's the temperature. Same with the meme. The meme appears and is popularized because it is registering the temperature of the zeitgeist. To mix my metaphors, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. Sparky says China is also culling pensioners with their lockdowns.
Right. Okay.
Thank you for that, Sparky. And Balke says there's no hippopotamus here in the room. Thank you for that, Sparky. And what else? Let me see if I've got any other. I think that's. Gosh, I don't know if I've missed one or not. Matthias says, is this Rubicon moment or more like a Suez Crisis moment for the U.S., which officially marked the end of the British Empire?
Well, for it can be both. For Britain, Suez, which remember was a war of choice, was a Rubicon moment. I mean, it was the moment when Britain's imperial power essentially ended. And it became very clear that Britain was, from that point on, a subordinate ally of the United States with no real capacity for independent decision-making.
Yeah. Kurt Fram says, many comments about why Sweden and Finland joined NATO. Answer, because decision is getting rushed without debate and a referendum.
Absolutely
very
correct.
J. James, thank you for that super sticker. Simo Bothell says, how much involvement do you think Henry Kissinger has in U.S. policy?
I don't know. I'm not sure that he does have much, but he's certainly around and he certainly gives advice.
Smug Buddha says, are there any dots to connect between the race gun violence in America and this global war?
Not really, except as a distraction.
Yeah.
Sparky says, like Fox News, Boris has controlled opposition.
Boris Johnson. Oh, absolutely.
Boris Johnson is an imbecile. Good God.
Yeah. Zugzuxi says, statistics on government chat, bombs away, sung by the police. The police, great band. Thank you for that, Zugzuxi. And Elaine says, is the fear of a false flag incriminating Russia receding? If China is now first choice for regime change, will the neocons leave the Europeans to their fate and work on their hatred for China?
I think the possibility the possibility of a false flag has, at this time, seems to have diminished quite a bit, because I think that there is a realization in the West that it's over, and to stir up some false flag or something like that is not really going to help the cause one way or the other. And so we might as well just give up the ghost and keep our powder dry so that we can refocus on China. I think that is the calculation. Because I again, it's a sense, and also I think that the false flag of that suburb that we dare not name because of YouTube shenanigans, well, that particular incident did not play as decisively as the people who said that wanted it to, and so I think that lesson has been learned. Like, it's not really going to happen, and if we make it bigger, there'll be too many ways for us to be implicated, and so it's just not worth it. I think that's the calculation. What do you guys think?
I suspect you're right. And I would add that incident north of Kiev. The more information we get, the more complicated it looks. So it's not possible to use it in quite that way, and that's been a consistent problem with all these false flag attempts in Ukraine. I'm afraid we are running short of time.
Elena Diaz says communism is an ideology based on just remuneration of work. Thank you for that. Elena and Balke says, correction, I was confused. Is there a rhinoceros in the room is the question. Thank you for that. Okay. All right. Yeah, we are out of time. Gonzalo, Alexander, thank you very much. Thank you to Odyssey. Thank you, Rumble. Thank you, YouTube and the locals chat. Thank you to our moderators. Thank you so much to our moderators, Valley S, Zarael, GEC812, Reckless Abandon also is in the house. And I think those were our moderators for the day. Thank you very much to the best moderators. Thank you to everyone that sent us questions. Jennifer, thank you for that final super sticker. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for that. And any final thoughts, guys, before we sign off? We have like a minute or two left. Gonzalo, any final thoughts?
No, I'm just happy that my motorcycle battery is charging. Even as I speak to you, it's charging away. And soon I'll be riding my BMW GS 1200 Adventure. Yes.
All right. Good, because there are people in the locals chat asking what kind of bike you have.
I have a couple. I have a Ducati Scrambler that's just run around town kind of a bike. I've got a BMW GS 1200 R1200 GS Adventure, and I have my eye on the next bike. Once this all settles down, I want to get a Ducati Diavol. That's my next bike. Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay, that's quite a bike actually.
Yeah.
Borkhan says, great show as usual, guys. Love to all. Remember, people, you are the resistance. Stay alive and hope we take our planet back. All right, Alexander, any final, what you have 10 seconds, Alexander, final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's been fascinating to watch a clear-cut Ukrainian defeat spun as a kind of victory. And this has been the story of the war all along, it seems to me. So many more victories like this, and there'll be no Ukraine left.
You're right.
Take care, everybody. Have a great day, and we'll have videos up on all our channels: Gonzalo's, Alexander's, mine, the Duran. See you soon.